Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'll give it a few seconds for everyone to connect. And we'll just admit everybody in from the waiting room. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. And apologies that we started a few minutes late. My name is Lily Manoyim from SALO, the Southern African Liaison Office. Thank you all so much for joining us today. As it's a very, very interesting and timely and important discussion. Just from technical side, to let you know that the meeting is being recorded, it's being live streamed on Facebook. And also that, of course, in the spirit of SALO dialogues, there'll be ample chance for engagement and participation and questions from everybody who's in attendance. So please prepare your questions, and in the second half of our dialogue, after our incredible panelists have spoken, we'll be opening up the discussion, and then you can write in the chat or you can raise your hand and everyone will be able to come in during that time. Other than that, would ask everyone to keep themselves muted. And I think tech-wise, that's all from me. So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Munjozi Mutandiri, who is going to be chairing the session. Over to you.
Thank you, Lily, for briefing us on those issues. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome colleagues that have been on this platform for years. And I also see a few colleagues that might be joining for the first time. I know that we are coming to the end of the year, and many of us are engaged in very rigorous processes for finishing our programming for the year. But you took your time to join this dialogue. We think that for those that have been on these platforms, we take seriously the state of the region and try to find ways, as you would know, SALO's cliche now, find ways of how to build national, regional, and international consensus on different issues. And today, we are here to discuss peace and security, democracy and governance in the Southern African region. But we know that this is not in isolation. It's connected massively to the developments across the continent, but also to the global dynamics that we find ourselves in. The interconnections are quite huge. And we have the advantage now that we are living in an era of digital spaces, where we know that they can amplify voices, but also they can be used to silence others that are not do not have their access that we have. But we think that we have, all of us since COVID, have been able to draw from the power of these spaces. And for us, like today, we are able to dissect issues, crises in real time. We know that colleagues from Madagascar will brief us on what's happening in real time. So from Maputo to Antananarivo, we know that we can harness the power of technology to keep ourselves abreast as things are happening on time. And just a few, maybe 2-3 remarks before we start to give a sense of what we are here for. I think we know that across the continent, and in particular, the Southern African region, which is in particular because that's what we are discussing, our challenges and struggles are quite interconnected. We know that what we are facing in Eswatini, in Mozambique, in Madagascar, in Mauritius, in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, and Malawi, they are very common threads. They are quite common threads that exist on those issues. And so even as we try to find solutions at a very local level within our countries, at national levels, we should be able to find the connections as a people across the region, across the continent, and strengthen our approaches at that level. We know that in Mozambique, the 2024 elections brought about what other observers and many other people have put as blatant irregularities to the election process. And we know, I think Professor Novunga will give us a sense of what that looked like and where they are today. But we know eventually President Chapo was declared the winner, and Venancio insisted that he had won the election. We are aware that there is now a dialogue process in Mozambique, which we intend to hear more about today. But we also know that the main challenger in that election, Venancio, has started a new party, Anamola. And so it would be good to get a sense of what's happening in Mozambique. What are the issues that have been at the center of the fragility of post-election pacts and post-election conflicts? What have they been able to do and begin to maybe thread find some common threads on how we build election integrity. And we know that what has happened in Mozambique echoes what we are getting from Madagascar just a few months after their elections. I think Stella will take us through how we ended up where we are. And the elections, we had a dialogue where Stella came in and a few other colleagues from Madagascar. At the time when the elections were happening, we had the complaints, we had the issues that sort of surrounded the election environment. Those included opposition boycotts, repressions. We had young people were not happy. And a couple of weeks back, we began to see a youth-fueled uprising over issues of corruption that led to the toppling of President Rajoelina. But we know that now there is a junta in charge, and it would be good to hear how, as the people of Madagascar, see this and how they are navigating to try to build an environment that is conducive for development. Because we also, I think, for Madagascar, are learning that issues of electoral integrity and issues of perceptions of electoral theft breeds authoritarian relapse in a way. They sort of breed a ground, a conducive environment for the people's voices to be undermined. We know that Tanzania is going into an election, and I know that Comrade Dawes is here today to take us through what's happening so that we are able to interact and find the connections that I keep coming back to. But we know that what we are hearing already from those that are in Tanzania and those that have been able to come out as exiles, it's not looking good. It looks like others have described it as a farce of an election, even before it happened. There are quite a number of preemptive disputes that are there. Chadema's disqualification. We know that Tundu is facing treason charges, and a number of abductions from reports that we gather have already happened. And that contrasts, of course, sharply with what we have seen in Malawi in the past few weeks. And I know that Thandi is here, and because of the amount of work they have been doing as an organization, together with many organizations, they are in jubilant mode because you feel that the people's will has been expressed. Of course, there will be questions around performance legitimacy and the other issues that will come with elections. But in terms of the questions of whether the election had delivered the will of the people. I think that the colleagues from Malawi are quite happy. They might not be happy with going back to a president they had removed before, but in terms of the processes and that, so I think Thandi will take us through that. And part of why we want to have these discussions is really to understand and unpack how issues of elections impact on issues of peace and security, and as a measure and a guide of where our democracy is and our democratic development. But in a nutshell, why do we hold these elections if we end up having a lot of conflict? Are they just rituals? Are they delivering what people intend to? Do they help to secure peace? How do we uphold issues of rights, issues of corruption that we see are becoming a very topical issue across the region? But how do we foster equity even as we begin to prosecute these struggles? So we know that strengthening electoral integrity is the cornerstone of a region that can really begin to say it is serving its people. And this would ensure that elections are a reflection of a true will of the people. Of course, that would breed trust and stability. And so we want to hear what are the safeguards that exist, the state of the independent electoral commissions, issues of transparent voter counting, and the SADC principles. Are they helping? Where are they? How have they been a tool that has helped us advance the kind of vision that obviously the founders of SADC had for this region? And we know that in the absence of addressing these challenges, we always fuel violence, and authoritarianism obviously deepens. I know that I can say a lot. The reason why I won't be able to say a lot is because I know that today we have a panel of really competent people to join these threads from Mozambique, resilient communities trying to help shape the way, particularly with the current dialogue, Madagascar's rupture, as we saw last week, Tanzania's threats, and of course the kind of triumph and jubilation that comes with the little successes that we are able to get in Malawi. All these things kind of come together for the region, for SADC, to begin to help us understand where we are and where we are going and what we need to be able to do, and that the issues of people's security are quite critical and at the center of what we should be doing as a region. And that these issues, we have to address them. We can't shy away from them. And so today, from Ambassador Lindiwe Zulu, Stella, Prof. Novunga, and Thandi, Valentine, and of course, my brother Takura, we hope that your inputs will be able to illuminate some path forward for where we are as a region, but also help us unpack and understand what exactly is happening, what's missing, what can we bring on the table. And I know that to the rest of the audience, we will be able to engage sharply and try to build consensus, and many other organizations that are represented here begin to help translate some of these words that we are getting in the platforms that we are in into action. And I think that's what this region's peace demands, and it demands no less. So welcome and thank you for being part of this dialogue. I want to get right into it and ask Stella straight from a very worrying development in Madagascar, especially, as I said earlier on, having just gone through an election. And I know you were quite strong when you came here in the dialogue we had in person. You were quite strong in bringing out what the issues were. And take us through what has happened. What's happening? Why are we here so quickly after an election that I think SADC had said was free and fair? It was credible. It was an expression of the people's will. Why are we here? What's happening in Madagascar? Thank you, Stella.
Okay, thanks for giving me the floor, Monjo. Good morning, everyone. My name is Razana Maefa Desiree Maristella, and I am the Monitoring and Election Observation Officer, as well as the spokesperson of the SAFID Observatory. Let me begin with a brief reminder of who we are. The SAFID Observatory is a national network of election observers and civic educators in Madagascar. It brings together 10 organizations working in various fields, such as the promoting of democracy and good governance, rural development, gender and youth empowerment, environmental protection and biodiversity conservation, and to fight against corruption. Since 2018, these organizations have worked hand in hand to promote voter education and ensure independent election observation across the country. With the support of the European Union and the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, OIF, we have successfully observed 2 presidential elections in 2018, 2019, and 2023, 2 legislative elections in 2019 and 2030, 2 communal elections in 2019 and 2024, and 1 senatorial election in 2020. Altogether, we have mobilized over 10,000 observers across 120 districts in Madagascar. The most recent presidential election held in 2023 had 3 candidates, but 10 of them boycotted the vote. Despite this, the election took place peacefully, and Andrazuela was elected in the first round with 58.96% of the votes. Why this boycott? Mainly because of controversial and unfair electoral laws. Let's take a short look back. We are currently under the 4th Republic, established by the Constitution adopted on December 10 in 2008, following the 29 coup d'etat. At that time, Andrazuela was the transitional president. After this condition came the electoral code, which was later modified under pressure from 53 members of parliament who removed several key articles that did not serve their interests. As a result, the government cannot decide alone without consultation on candidate dispositions and election arrangements fraud decrease. Candidates can spend unlimited campaign funds without having to disclose their sources or respect any sterling, and even financial irregularities are found. There are no sanctions. The any independent National Electoral Commission can revise and validate the electoral rule in its own without consulting other stakeholders. All these irregularities have created mistrust and tension among political actors and the public. Another major problem lies in the inconsistent interpretation of laws by the judiciary. The same law can be interpreted differently by different judges, leading to contradictory or even illogical decisions. This inconsistency is one of the main causes of dispute between citizens and institutions. The frustration have grown amid social difficulties, including a lack of access to water, electricity, and basic services. Three municipal councillors attempted to hold a peaceful meeting at the Place de la Démocratie on September 25, but two of them were brutally arrested by security forces in violation of their human rights. This incident became the spark that ignited public anger, especially among the youth who rallied under a movement called Gen Z to support these councillors and denounce the abuses. Unfortunately, the security force responded with excessive violence, even committing inhuman acts, such as burning protesters' hair and firing on demonstrators. Many citizens did not join the protest out of fear of reprisals, fear that nothing would change. Yes, deep down, people followed the movement closely, especially on social media, expressing silent solidarity. You all know that what happened next. President Andrazuel, who also held the chairmanship of the SADC since last August, fled the country on October 24. And Michael Randienerin was appointed by the High Constitutional Court as president of the National Refondation. All of this illustrates a simple truth. Democracy comes at a price. And unfortunately, in Madagascar, we still struggle to pay that price due to the lack of a genuine political will. True democracy requires certain fundamental principles like alternation of power, freedom of expression, equal enforcement of the law, and the inclusive participation of all stakeholders in every process. Yet, since 2028, no elected president has organized the regional and provincial election required by our constitution, and none have been held accountable. Political parties remain weak and largely driven by money. The independence of CENI is still distant due to its composition, internal structure, and appointment process. Since 2018, throughout our election observation mission, we have noted a troubling pattern: electoral impunity, no investigation, no prosecution, no sanctions, regardless of the violations observed. That is why the work of a Safid observatory remains essential to observe, document, inform, and promote a truly inclusive and credible democracy in Madagascar. Thank you for your attention. There is very many information here in Madagascar, so Your question will help me to give you some information. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella, for taking us through that journey and bringing out clearly how irregularities breed mistrust and lack of confidence in institutions, but also just highlighting what has happened recently. And also the importance, I think, for me, which I think there will be a lot of questions around the significance of Madagascar chairing SADC and at the same time having to go through what you are going through as a country, but also giving us a sense of how, as the people of Madagascar, you are seeing the current regime. In what light are you seeing this regime, and the hope that you have to going back to normalcy in terms of a civilian government? I think that there will be questions that will come around that. You touched on the price of democracy. For many activists, we know that this is true across the continent, across the region, and indeed across the world. I hear a lot of American colleagues agreeing with us that there is a serious price to pay for that, especially for the kind of work that you do. I know that we'll come back. There will be questions that will come to you as people try to unpack some of the things that you might not have put on the table. But I want to move quickly into Malawi, because I know that the colleagues and comrades from Malawi feel that they did some splendid work in trying to build some electoral integrity, but also I think that the idea that elections do not always have to become a hotbed of conflict is a very important aspect of what the region and the continent should be trying to build. How do we strengthen our ways and the ways we have conducted elections so that they lead into sustainable development, but also sustainable peace and deeper entrenchment of democratic practices. Tandy, please give us a sense of the mood in Malawi, the feeling within the organization in terms of what's happening now. Where are we in Malawi? How are things looking? And what you are doing to even strengthen further. And Malawi is interesting because you guys, a couple of years back, we know after the 2019 election, you went through a very difficult period where a number of you were on the streets. I remember being in Lilongwe with some of you, and I know that it was difficult. The court agreed with many of you that the election had not gone the way it should have gone. It was not an expression of the people's will. You went into another election and you felt that it delivered. And there were some reforms that you did. And a few years later, you have another election and you have a feeling that, again, the will of the people has been respected this time around. Take us through what's happening in Malawi in terms of this, but also how they feed into issues of peace and security at the region. What lessons can we take from Malawi as a region?
Thank you so much, Monjo. Good morning, everybody. And my name is Thandi Zomprio. I work for Center for Human Rights and Rehabilitation, one of the oldest, NGO, local NGO in Malawi. And Center for Human Rights, we work around, issues to do with, democracy, gender and environmental issues that affect, the welfare of the people. So the fact that we also tackle issues of gender. We're also a member of the NGO Gender Coordination Network, which is a network, an umbrella body for, institutions that work around, gender issues. And for that matter, we've been, involved in the past, as far as I joined CHRI, the past, election since 2014. I should say since 2004, because our institution was established in 1996, just at the onset of multi-party democracy. And we have been part of all the elections. But also to talk about the gender issues vis-a-vis elections, we have also been part of the champions of the 50-50 program, which was launched by the government of Malawi in 2004. And for that matter, we have been, I can say we are expertise in the works of elections. So for us, Malawi, we are in the jubilation time where we have observed the most peaceful, elections. Looking back from where we're coming from in 2019, where our election had to be nullified just because of the way other.
Tandy, I'm not sure if it's just on my, I think it's my internet. No, that's fine. You can go ahead. I wanted to ask you to remove the video, so it's on my end. Let's go.
Okay, all right.
We can hear okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So we're coming from the history where in 2019, the elections were nullified, especially the presidential elections. We had to go through the streets protesting how the irregularities that had happened during that time. And luckily, Malawi went through another elections in 2020 where we saw the Dr. Lazarus Chakwera taking over from Peter Mutharika. So it was during this time, during the re-election time when we also had COVID. We were just in the midst of COVID, and we also saw that during. Hello.
Sorry.
When we were doing.
Sorry, Tandy. Can we please ensure that we are muted if we are not speaking? And Tandy, can you please go ahead? Apologies for that.
Okay, so thank you so much, Munjo. So I was saying that after the elections were nullified, we saw that we went through the pause, but during those pause in 2020, SADC observers did not participate in that election, and we all know the importance of SADC observers and international observers during elections. They also strengthens legitimacy, but also confidence building. But during that time, we did not have the SADC, observers because it was amidst COVID, and the fact that all the processes went on well, and we managed to get a new president during that time. It was also a plus for us as Malawi because it was a learning process. And also we were also coming. The 2019 election gave us space for electoral reforms, especially knowing what's the legitimate number of votes that somebody can claim that they have won. So the courts had also said that the president that will accumulate 50+1 votes, then that one will become a president. And of course, there were a lot of electoral reforms that were also provided for and proposed, like the gender quotas and whatever. But I think the one that passed through parliament was the 50+1. So now coming to 2025, this was going to be a very contentious, elections, knowing that we in Malawi, we were going through a lot of economic crisis. And I think this is across the region, but surely for us, it coincided with, elections, inflation, lack of fuel, and, just general economic crisis. And I think a lot of political actors took advantage of the situation to discredit each other, but also, fight for the space. We also saw during this time, this is a common practice for all elections in Malawi, where we saw that the national media station, the Malawi Broadcasting Corporation, was monopolized by the ruling government. And there was a lot of, violence before the campaign period. But once the campaign was launched, we saw that the violence had subsided. But also, we also saw a lot of candidates who were dissatisfied by their own political party, guidelines on primary elections, where, the women had registered, but there were a few, that contested in the election. So what I'm proud to say is that the Malawi Electoral Commission made sure that they were always updating the people on the processes. Of course, it also made another challenge where Malawi was going to use the biometric, gadgets for voting, and this created a lot of misconception, and it needed the Malawi Electoral Commission and other stakeholders like CSOs like us to demystify the misinformation. And all this, I'm talking about all this to the fact that how was this going to, provide for a credible election come the voting day. So we also saw that, the police itself was very, there was a lot of favoritism on who has committed like incited violence. We saw a lot of, some women were attacked in Blantyre, and then here in Nilongwe, but then they were from the opposition party. And then once the ruling party, were attacked, we could see like culprits taken to task. And when we went to the polls, we saw there were a lot of observers that came. And for me, I feel this was very important, especially the SADC observers, because they had to do pre-engagements with different, stakeholders, electoral stakeholders. And for me, this was also very good to ensure that, how will whatever they found on the ground going to inform on the results of the elections that we're going to have. So like, for instance, for myself, my organization, we had a consultation with SADC observers, and we also saw that the SADC observers were like putting out press briefings, informing the public on the processes, and also, how the elections were going. And for me, I also feel that the presence of the SADC observers cemented the credibility of the elections, the fairness of the elections, because we are coming from 2019 where the elections were nullified, and the coming of the SADC helped to, scrutinize, also assure the people that, political actors were, abiding by the guidelines, but also, electoral stakeholders like the MEC and the police were also on their best behavior, abiding to, the guidelines on what they committed to regionally and internationally. So when we voted, I think the observers were deployed, but for us also as CSOs, we were also accredited to be observers, local observers, and we went on the ground. Of course, we had a few challenges where, some centers opened a little late, because of, staff deployment, but also the gadgets could not pick up, and some of the staff didn't have the capacity, enough capacity to manage the gadgets. But eventually, polling stations were opened, and we didn't have a lot of problems, and and people voted, and the Malawi Electoral Commission made sure that the results were also announced according to the the legal framework. Of course, people were excited to hear more news, but kudos to the Malawi Electoral Commissioner, who was so steady on abiding to the legal framework, to say she was not going to be moved by what people are going to say. And this also helped to create that stability, but also to assure the people to say the elections were credible and fair. Of course, the reports that were coming in from local observers, from SADC, from EU observers, it was kind of like talking to each other. But for us, this election has also been a learning process, where now we feel that we need to take the electoral reform, proposals that came out in 2019 to task. Like, for instance, 50, almost half of the voters, or the people that registered for voting were women, and yet we only have about 48 women that were elected into parliament out of 229 seats. And this is just a 21% of the. So this time around, maybe it's also high time that as Malawi, we need to see how best we can suggest and start working on quotas to be implemented in our legal framework, to be integrated into our legal framework, but also see how best we can make sure that the national media platform is used fairly by all players, by having a legal framework that legalize or standardize how it's used. So for us in Malawi, at the meantime, we can say Malawi is a peaceful country. We may not be happy that we are recycling leaders, but what is important is we went to the polls, processes went on well, and from whatever happened, there are a few things that we need to change, and the 2025 elections provided for us a platform where we're going to learn through recommendations from our external observers and even internal observers. Coming to that point, let me stop there and leave it to you, Monjo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thandi. And I think that what is fascinating about Malawi is that you guys are documenting your lessons, and that you are able to pinpoint specifically what moved the needle from a crisis moment to where you are now. But even as you're speaking, you're already talking about what needs to be done, which reforms, which lessons do we need to pivot on as Malawi in terms of even strengthening the issues of electoral integrity as a way of guaranteeing peace and security. But also I think that these are lessons that at a regional level we begin to need to pivot on to strengthen the kind of strategies that we put in ensuring peace and security and even deepening and strengthening governance. So thank you so much for that. I know that there will be questions after that, and I think there will be an issue around what were the reports looking like, particularly our own report from SADC, the SADC Observer Mission. And but thank you so much for the input. I want to quickly jump to our next speaker, and we want to go to the beautiful country of Mozambique and ask Prof. Novunga, who is with the CDD, but also a very strong voice out of Mozambique in unpacking the issues that are happening there. And Prof, I know that You have forgiven me for waking you up in terrible, terrible hours, but I hope that you're fully awake. Take us through what's the state of affairs in Mozambique. I know that last year you had some very difficult processes through the elections. There is a dialogue process that we hear now. As I said earlier, we know that VM has started a new political movement, and I hear some fissures in terms of his role in the dialogue process and the thinking. And obviously, this brings a lot of tensions to ensuring peace and security. But issues of governance and democracy themselves are threatened as a result of these tensions. Where is the Mozambican society? What's the state of the dialogue process? What lessons can we take on as a region in terms of strengthening some of these processes that will ensure that we have electoral integrity, not just for the sake of it, but to ensure that the democracy and issues of elections save our people, help us save our people as a region. So please, you have the platform.
Thank you very much, Comrade, for having me so early in the morning here.
Apologies, Prof. Apologies.
It is still 3 a.m. in the morning where I am now, but it's okay. When it is a call to reflect on our situation at home, we have to be available at any time. So thank you for having me, and I apologize, colleagues, for not joining earlier. Well, this conversation comes at the right time. And I'll be reflecting on 3 issues. Number 1 is the post-election crisis in Mozambique. Number 2 is the Cabo Delgado situation. And number 3 is peace and security in Mozambique from a governance perspective. You know, on the first, which is the post-election crisis, Mozambique was in the news everywhere after the 2024 October elections, followed by violence, a violence which erupted across the country as the people were in the streets to protest against what they perceived as a fraudulent election. Mondlane Venancio, the then presidential candidate, he called protests starting on the 21st of October 2024. In fact, it's a year now. But I must say that the momentum for those protests was ignited by the cold blood assassination of Dr. Elvino Dias on the 19th of October 2024, who until the end of his life, he was the lawyer for Venancio Mondlane and Paul Gwamba, who was the spokesperson of the Podemos, the political party which was supporting Venancio Mondlane's presidential candidates. So that ignited the momentum for protests. Those protests, they were I mean, they were unique in the Mozambique context. Mozambique is known for fraudulent elections. Mozambique is known for violence post-election. But Mozambique is known, or until then, Mozambique was known for a sort of a militarized post-election violence, where the then former resistance, former rebel movement would go back to the bushes and start the war. But the 2024 protests were urban-based, agitated by the young people who coalesced around Venancio Mondlane. I mean, at some point, people said a revolution was taking place in Mozambique for the magnitude of the protests, and also on how disorganized the police was there to quell those protests. There were 2 months, November and December. Mozambique was a no-go area. Mozambique was almost like the Haiti of Africa. Everything was burning, tires burning everywhere, and people could not move. But you know, the machinery of the government managed to keep a barely minimum conditions for the announcement of the results, and subsequently for the validation of those results by the Constitutional Council, which sparked protests everywhere. But they clinged on that minimum space that they had, and the winner, the declared winner, Daniel Chapu, was inaugurated on the 15th of January. So Mozambique has a president now, Mozambique has a government now, and the violence has stopped. So there is no violence. Moderator said, a beautiful country of Mozambique. Yes, the beauty is there. But it's a fragile peace. It's a fragile stability. It's fragile. It's a fragile because there is an ongoing dialogue. This dialogue, it is anchored in a law. So one of the first acts of the president was to approve a law which was passed by Parliament. And this law, it sets the foundations for the dialogue in Mozambique. And at the time of passing of this law, Venancio Mondlane did not have a political party because he fell out with Podemos. Podemos now is part of the establishment. So Mondlane, popular as he is, supported as he is, but he was like sort of pariah. So the parties in parliament, namely Frelimo, Podemos, the MDM, and Renamo, they passed this law. And this law, it sets the architecture for the dialogue, excluding Mondlane. So Mondlane is excluded from that architecture. And it is within this framework passed by the parliament and promulgated by the president that the dialogue is taking place. It is called inclusive dialogue, but it excludes Mondlane. So the adjective of inclusive, it is figurative. It is there really for to make the framing beautiful, but the reality is that Mondlane is not part of it. and the dialogue is taking place. Many people have cast doubt in the outcome of this dialogue, as it excludes the main actor that called for dialogue. But not only that, he was the person who created the conditions for the need for that dialogue. So there is an ongoing dialogue, but it is an exclusionary dialogue. Now we see technical groups are being formed and civil society is being included, including ourselves. CDD is part of the technical dialogue, but because we were being co-opted to participate in that dialogue and enrich the conversations, but that does not make it inclusive, because, as I've said, civil society, we influence the political processes, but we are not contenders of political processes. So the main actors are those who are the politicians. And if a dialogue excludes one key politician, conceptually, it is not inclusive, regardless of including all critical voices of civil society, etc., but it is not inclusive. Venancio Mondlane is launching parallel consultation process. He is launching a parallel consultation process to get to, he says he wants to come up with his own proposals for reforms. So we are waiting to see. We will influence the process much as possible. Mozambique is relatively stable now. There is ongoing dialogue, but it's not inclusive. This is the first thing. The second topic I want to talk about is Cabo Delgado. Cabo Delgado, I see Comrade Lindiwe Sisulu here, who I had the chance to meet in Parliament at the beginning of the conflict in Cabo Delgado. And I see many more here that I recognize them in various conversations that we had on Cabo Delgado. Colleagues, friends, and comrades, the Cabo Delgado situation, it is a cancer for peace and security in SADC region. It's a cancer. It's a cancer that it is not benefiting of any sort of therapy. Cabo Delgado is, in fact, it has become a forgotten war. It has become a forgotten war. Nobody cares anymore about that conflict. Nobody cares anymore about that conflict. Nobody cares anymore. If you look at it from the humanitarian perspective, I mean, there's an ongoing humanitarian crisis in Cabo Delgado. More than 1 million IDPs that are starvation, they have nothing. The basic dignities of human beings in Cabo Delgado is being neglected by the comrades in the region. Women, children, and elderly people that have to move from one place to other hopelessly, nobody cares. So there is an ongoing humanitarian crisis there. This is number one. Number two, you look at Cabo Delgado. Cabo Delgado should be a paradise. It should be a paradise. There is everything there. But Cabo Delgado is a war zone. It's a war zone. And recent developments, you see the resurgence of the conflict in ways that in places like Mosimbo da Praia, the extremists, they're in charge. Violent extremists are in charge in ways that they go to madrasas and they're the ones who are conducting religious ceremonies in the daylight. And nobody cares. Militarily speaking, Cabo Delgado is a war zone and it's expanding to Nampula. And it remains a neglected conflict from the Mozambique. Can you hear me?
Yes, Prof, I can hear you. You are quiet. I can hear you, Prof. Prof, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Nobody cares from the security sector perspective. It has been 7 years. Where in the world have you seen a faceless conflict for 7 years? Where have you seen that? And a conflict in a zone which is the game changer for that country. That region is home for 100+ TCFs of gas. That is a future for Mozambique and for our region. But Mozambique and SADC are unable to tap into that resource because of this conflict. Yet, Mozambique and SADC, they cannot work in ways that first we know who are the people behind that conflict. Number one. Number two, what do they want? Number three, what is the way forward to address it? There is no platform for that. It has been 7 years. We worked tirelessly. Moving in capitals of SADC to mobilize SADC to bring a military support for Cabo Delgado. SADC, with all the criticisms I have on SADC, but if there is something that they have done is to mobilize for Cabo Delgado. They mobilized. Samimi was there. But my own government in Mozambique did not give the space for the Samim to be meaningful. Instead, they wanted to bring the Rwandese. So we have Rwandese troops in my country. And the terms of reference, the terms of deployment, only were signed by the current president 4 years after the deployment. So it's an opaque deployment. Initially, they seem to be doing relatively okay, but now they seem not to be doing what they said that they would do, to the extent that Cabo Delgado is becoming, now you have two Cabo Delgados. The Cabo Delgado protected by the elite, the military elite that is paid by the oil and gas companies, and you have a Cabo Delgado that is left for what is out there. So the people of Mozambique in Cabo Delgado are not being protected by our army, because our army, fragile as it is protecting oil and gas infrastructure. That is a clear violation of the SADC protocol. It's a clear violation of the people's right, the right to security. It's a clear violation. It's a clear violation of international law to have our army protecting economic interests instead of providing security for the citizens of our country. So there is ongoing opacity. There is no openness for dialogue. The president said 3 days ago in Geneva, that violent extremists, they have few days, either through dialogue or through other means. We are here to see, but the reality is that Cabo Delgado, it is a clear collapse of the state. Cabo Delgado, it's a clear collapse of the security system of the country, of the region, which is enabling the proliferation of these groups, which undermine the basic rights of the people in a context where more and more the international companies, they are ready to move with the exploration at any cost. They have their own timelines to pay back the money, and they will move with what one day we labeled as the hierarchization of Cabo Delgado, where there are enclaves that are elite security protected, and the rest of the population is left out there. So the point here is Cabo Delgado is not being addressed. The crisis is there. Elites are competing. There is no framework for dialogue. The conflict being addressed, and that it risks spillover, not only to the country, but to undermine peace and security in the region. And this brings me to the third and final point, which is why Mozambique, after 3 decades of inaugurating a democratic governance, it has never had peace. Why? Why Mozambique cannot have peace? It's simple. Governance is not right in Mozambique. Governance is not right in Mozambique. One day, 12 years ago, Christine Lagarde, the then IMF director, came to Mozambique and said, Mozambique would be the next Qatar of Africa, because Mozambique has everything. There's youth, young population. It has the population as a market, as a workforce, as a market. Mozambique has vast natural resources, you name it, critical minerals, oil, gas, mines. Mozambique has beauties of gems of all sorts of kinds. We have water, we have rivers, electricity, we have everything. So Mozambique had everything. But governance is not right. With all that we have, Mozambique cannot pay salaries to civil servants. So teachers are not being paid, nurses not being paid, police not being paid, military, our army is not being paid salaries regularly. The state is unable to perform basic functions as per our constitution, which is to provide the basic rights for citizens and to protect human dignity. They cannot provide that because 2/3 of the domestic revenues is to pay the basic functioning of the state. 1/3 to service debt, and is left only with coins. And hospitals have no medicine. So what I'm putting here is a picture of a state which is in the direction of collapsing, or it is unable to perform basic functions of a state, not measured by international standards, but measured against our own constitution in Mozambique. When you have that in a context of an exponential growth of the population, and the state is not there for the people, for the young people, and corruption is the game in town. Corruption is the game in town. By corruption here, I don't mean embezzlement of funds. I mean the state capture, where the interests of the elites are at the core of the state workings and functioning, and which result in the elites competing, and they turn it into a dysfunctional institution. When you have that, it is not a surprise that the state cannot allow people to have a peaceful protest. So people are not allowed in Mozambique to peacefully protest. And this is enriched not only in our constitution, but in the African Union, United Nations, and other international legal instruments that Mozambique abide by. But so it cannot, because everything democratic, it threatens the security of a fragile, small, and dysfunctional state. So peace and security in Mozambique is at risk. Risk for the country, but risk for the region. The reason being that Mozambique is positioned as an entry in a corridor format for South Africa, the Maputo corridor. You saw it when the protest erupted. Protesters blocked the Maputo corridor, and blocking the Maputo corridor, you are not only affecting South Africa, you are affecting Namibia, you are affecting even Angola, because they use that, affecting Botswana to access to the port in Maputo. When we have protests in Beira, you block the Beira corridor, which affects Zimbabwe, affects Zambia, affects even the DRC, it affects Malawi. When you have protests in the north, in Nampula, it affects the Nacala corridor. So, and when we have in Cabo Delgado, it affects the further north to the Rovuma bridge. So any crisis, any peace and security crisis in Mozambique, it is not a Mozambique, it's not a domestic, it is regional. But SADC and Gabron, they are okay to hear my president saying the crisis in Mozambique is a domestic crisis. It is not domestic. It is regional. It is a SADC region. So what I want to say as a conclusion is that now that we have a relative stability in Mozambique, it is time for Gaborone not to stay there in Gaborone. It's time to come down to Maputo and make an assessment of the situation to help the authorities in Mozambique set things right. If that is not being done, we will have the same happening in 2028 and 2029 when the next cycle election is scheduled. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Prof. Quite comprehensive, and also I think you showed the connections in terms of the challenges we have in the region across the region. I think you indeed bring out what we are trying to bring out all along, that the challenges in any one of the states in the region are a challenge for the entire region. And we can't get to a point where we say sustainably as a region, we are peaceful, we have enough human security, while any one of the countries are facing the kind of challenges that you put on the table. But you also took us through, I think, a very important history of Mozambique, so that we are able to really understand where we are and the call to action for SADC. I think it's not just to the SADC as an institution, but to us as citizens of this region, because I think understanding what's happening around us is an important aspect of building peace and security. I know that there will be a lot of questions, so I'm hoping that you won't go back to sleep. I think the issues of the issues of elections, because with the picture you painted, and 12 months ago we had an election. What happened in Cabo Delgado? How was the election conducted, and what does that mean? Even to the dialogue process now, do we have parts of Mozambique that are not engaging in this dialogue process to address what clearly were the issues that citizens of Mozambique put on the table a year ago and maybe way before that, to say we need to address them? So the essence of this dialogue process, I know that you said it is an exclusionary, inclusive dialogue. I don't know what that means, but clearly there are issues. But I think there will be a lot of questions. But thank you for giving us that picture. As we get to the end, I know that Takura and Ambassador Lindiwe will try to give us the connections from each of the member states as we begin to wind down. But before we get to that, I want to bring in a colleague. We heard of Madagascar. We saw the developments last week live on our social medias and all that. We heard of the sweet and uncommon triumph of electoral democracy in Malawi in the past month. We now heard about the challenges, a myriad of challenges in Mozambique, this is painting a picture of where we are as a region, and hopefully we can begin to knit the threads of how do we navigate towards a sustainably peaceful region. And now I want to move to yet another hotspot that is emerging, judging by the comrades we have seen moving out of Tanzania into different capitals across the region, going into exile, but also the developments inside Tanzania as we approach the 29th of October election, and to give us a clear picture of what's happening there and what we could do. Clear asks, I hope. I want to bring in Valentine Roemamu, who is with the Center for Strategic Litigation in Tanzania. But I know that currently he's not in Tanzania, he's somewhere. And Comrade Deus, can you please take the floor?
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Mujozi. I appreciate the opportunity to debrief with colleagues, and good to see some familiar faces in this conversation. It was interesting to hear developments in Madagascar, Malawi, and Mozambique. And I should start by perhaps underscoring two important observations about Tanzania. I think it is very rare for our country to be in spaces like this and being discussed in the same lines as some of the familiar crises in the region. This is primarily because whilst there has been ongoing repression in Tanzania for close to 10 years or so now, it has all happened in Kiswahili, which I understand a lot of you don't follow. But also Tanzania's image is clouded by the nostalgia of Mwalimu Nyerere, and many then fail to perceive Tanzania for the crisis that it is. Tanzania holds a special place in Southern Africa as guarantor of the independence of many, if not all, of the frontline states. And because of that, again, we have evaded scrutiny from our peers in the region. So even as we currently speak, despite a crisis that has been simmering for a long time, with the UN commenting about the situation, UN human rights experts, the African Commission commenting on the situation, SADC has been completely absent from the scene. And it is hard to explain why that is the case, but I thought this briefing, among other things, would help us to make some progress in that direction. So I should start by describing the context and the crisis as we observe it in Tanzania. Of course, I'm happy to share some written briefing with you to give you, in the interest of time, to give you further context. But one is that since 2015, or right before 2015, with the election of the late President John Magufuli, we have been facing a crisis that the APRM noted in its 2013 review of Tanzania, which has been evolving over time. In 1992, we opted to embrace multipartism, but we went ahead with that decision without really embracing pluralism. So the then Chief Justice of Tanzania, Francis Nyalali, made several recommendations of the reforms that needed to happen for Tanzania's constitution and electoral framework to comply with universally accepted multi-party standards. Unfortunately, most of those recommendations were never adopted as recommended. And we have spent 33 years in dialogue about enforcing those recommendations. And that is primarily the reason why the main opposition party decided against proceeding with these elections. Until 2015, elections had, their own controversies, but they were never that deep. And they were never that deep because despite not embracing fully many of these recommendations made initially in 1992, there was some semblance of a level playing field. And the ruling party had been open to competing. The ruling party first had embraced an active culture of democratic competition within its own ranks, and presidential candidates were always an outcome of a very competitive process in the party, so competitive that the whole nation would be glued observing that competition than they would be observing the competition between the ruling party and its competitors. Now, with the election in 2015, there were already some irregularities in the process that led to the nomination of President John Magufuli. And in fact, there was a boycott by members of the Central Committee of the party against his nomination on the charges that the then chair of the party, President Kikwete, had violated the party's own electoral process and denied his erstwhile political ally, Edward Lowassa, the nomination. As a result, two former prime ministers defected from the ruling party into the opposition, the leading opposition party, Chadema, and that began to create a fear within the ruling party that if they were not mindful, they would actually lose the election. After a moment of anxiety, President Magufuli was declared winner of the 2015 elections, but one of his first order of business was to start clamping down on the opposition, having witnessed himself what could happen if the opposition wasn't contained. And indeed, he announced in February 2026 that by the time of the next election in 2020, there shall not be an opposition worth the name in Tanzania. And indeed, we saw the most violent clampdown on the opposition between 2016 after his announcement and 2020. The first order was to ban political rallies. So opposition parties were not allowed to hold any rallies between 2016 and 2020. So they went into the 2020 elections hamstrung in a way. However, they were able to survive the clampdown primarily because, one, they had registered the highest vote, parliamentary vote as a result of the 2020 elections, and threatened, therefore, the hegemony of the ruling party. And because of the votes they had earned in 2020, they had the financial resources to continue organizing despite not being able to hold political rallies. In 2020, President Magufuli ran against Tundu Lissu, who at that point was the deputy chair of the leading opposition party. Despite allowing Tundu Lissu to run against him, President Magufuli made sure that there wasn't a transparent process of voting or counting. As a result, to this date, if you visit the Electoral Commission's website, you will not see the final vote tally. Whilst he was declared winner with almost 83% of the vote from an initial 58% in 2015, nobody has seen the independent tally district by district that led to that pronouncement. Unfortunately, or fortunately for some, President Magufuli's win only lasted about 7 months because he passed away in March 2021. And in a moment of anxiety and distress, many in Tanzania had hoped that with his passing, whoever came after him would then embark on a process that addressed, the very anomalies that had been witnessed until then. So this is how President Samia Suluhu Hassan ascended to the presidency, and in her very first speech at State House in Dar es Salaam upon inauguration, she did admit that indeed the country had gone through a turbulent period, and she was committed to leading the country through a process of reconciliation. True to her word, President Samia then proceeded to launch a dialogue process at the end of 2021. That saw a process rather of gathering public opinion to diagnose and dissect the deficiencies in Tanzania's democracy. Many of those observations that were eventually submitted to the president in October 2022 were a repetition of already the comments that had been made in February 1992, primarily focusing on constitutional amendments that would provide for an electoral commission that was independent, but also amendments that would allow for contesting presidential election results, consistent with the decision of the African Court in 2020 that compelled the Tanzanian state within 18 months to make these constitutional amendments. Some of those repeated amendments also had to do with the manner with which the Electoral Commission would be appointed. And on top of that, also providing for a level playing field in the elections. That period between 2021 and 2023 also saw President Samia engage in bilateral dialogue with the leading opposition party that had boycotted previous dialogue efforts, primarily because in their contestation, they argued that they had been severely clobbered during the 2020 elections. Clobbered in the sense that 400 of their leaders across the country had been unfairly arrested and detained in the lead up to the 2020 general elections, but also that they had been threatened, their lives had been threatened, and the majority of their Central Committee members had to flee the country. And therefore, it would have been impossible when the dialogue process had been launched for them to engage effectively in it. But also at that stage in July 2021, the chair of the leading opposition party was himself violently arrested in northwest Tanzania and being tried for charges of terrorism. So of course, it would have been impossible with the leader in jail, many of his deputies fleeing the country, 400 of their leaders and members across the country arrested. They couldn't have partaken in the dialogue process. Now, in response to that, President Samia then allowed for the leader of the opposition to be freed from his charges of terrorism in March 2022. And by May 2022, she launched a bilateral dialogue process with the leading opposition. that saw them make some concessions. The opposition party went into dialogue with 11 concrete demands. Of the 11, 3 were actually met eventually. The rest were ignored. Despite that move, the Tanzanian state continued a process that had initially promised reforms, and in parliament, 3 bills were introduced in November 2023 that were aimed at addressing some of those perennial concerns around the independence of the Electoral Commission. Unfortunately, as of February 2024, when these 3 laws were passed through Parliament, many of the reforms that had been anticipated by many of us in civil society, but also the opposition, had been completely ignored. Even the decisions of the African Court, the 3 particular ones around the independence of the Electoral Commission, the right to challenge presidential election results, and the right for independent candidates, all of them had been ignored in those 3 pieces of legislation. Now, what that then meant was the launch of a protest by the opposition against, what then had appeared clear, the lack of political will among President Samia's administration to embrace these reforms, even when the new legislation provided for a new process of the appointment of the Electoral Commission. It came with a caveat under Section 27 that that process would only be embarked on upon the expiration of the tenure of the existing commission, which would only happen at the end of 2026. The current Electoral Commission is single-handedly appointed by the president, who herself happens to be a candidate in these elections, and therefore skewing, room for fair political competition, because the chair of the commission is appointed by the president. The 7 commissioners are also appointed by the president. So is the chief executive of the Electoral Commission and the directors leading the commission. Now, in such skewed environment, the opposition already called for a boycott at the end of 2024, because they saw no room for them to be able to compete freely in these elections. In the local government elections that took place in November 2024, we saw what can only be described as severe crackdown on civic and democratic space. What was hoped to have been an opportunity for the president to reclaim the democratic space and allow for some semblance of democratic reforms ended up being a lost opportunity. In those elections, the opposition claimed that 90% of their candidates had been disqualified from competing, even after several appeals. In those elections, the opposition saw severe violence meted on them. One member of the Central Committee of the ruling party, of the opposition party, Chadema, was abducted in broad daylight by heavily armed men who are alleged to have been, who under normal circumstances, given the kind of weaponry they possessed, could only be affiliated with the security forces in Tanzania. He was found 2 days later, having been tortured, his eyes gouged, and acids smeared all over his body. It was really an environment of severe tension and fear. And the opposition described it as a moment where they completely gave up on any chances of them going into the general elections this October, next week, with a level playing field. So because of that, even when they attempted to engage with the state, in January, they launched yet another appeal where they said to the ruling party that before Parliament was formally adjourned in June this year, that there was still space to make at least some minimal reforms, even if not constitutional reforms, to allow for there to be some semblance of competition. At the end of the local elections in November last year, the ruling party claimed to have won 99% of the 60,000 seats, well, 120,000 seats of local government across the country, which in many ways would be unprecedented because until 2014, the ruling party had only claimed a win of about 24% of those seats. And as is common in most places, there was already a trajectory where the ruling party was losing ground. Given the ruling party's record, which is, I would say, comparable to what we're seeing in South Africa, it is really a miracle that the party can still claim that level of support. So the opposition decided to stay out. As a result of their consistent demands, their leader is now being charged for treason, and therefore he is unable to run. He was expected to run against the incumbent. The one opposition party, which is of course the second largest party in the country, decided to field a candidate. He himself was barred from running. And therefore, President Samia is facing 16 other challengers, none of whom has ever won political office, whether at local government or national government level. In June, the UN human rights expert released a statement and subsequently a communication to the Tanzanian representation in Geneva, raising concern about the reports of over 200 people who had been enforcedly disappeared. That number has probably doubled since. As Comrade Mujozi indicated, many of us have had to secure ourselves by not being present in country. When I was listening to Stella from Madagascar, I can tell you for sure that there are many Tanzanians who right now would trade to be Madagascan, let alone being Malawian, where you can still hold an election with election observers on the ground and an opposition party or opposition party is still running. That's impossible in Tanzania in the current circumstances. There are no major observer groups. All the major human rights organizations like ours who tried to run have actually been denied accreditation. The few who've been allowed still are confined within very restrictive regulations that require them to present their reports, observer reports, before they can speak about them in public. So it's almost, they've bastardized the election observation process. And because of the Kiswahili I referred to earlier, many of you outside Tanzania struggle to follow a highly repressive environment, a highly violent one. We are now grappling with rumors that have come in this week that our neighbors in Uganda have been so generous as to donate security forces to Tanzania to aid in the continued repression as we are seeing in Uganda right now. And that worries many of us. There's a lot of tension. The opposition is out of this process of coronation, but young people are calling, as we saw in Madagascar, for public demonstration against what is happening, the facade of an election that is happening in Tanzania. The president has consistently spoken on the campaign trail against people coming out. And of course, we have seen right now in the streets of Dar es Salaam and all the major cities, we've gotten used to police, heavily armed police vehicles all over. So it's unclear whether young people will muster the courage to still come out despite, the threats that they're obviously seeing. But whatever happens next Wednesday, I think a new chapter is about to be opened in Tanzania's political history. A chapter of either heightened impunity or a chapter of civil defiance that has not been seen in Tanzania before. Again, let me stop by just also noting the critical historical role that Tanzania plays as the harbinger of peace in the Great Lakes region. Tanzania, unfortunately, has contributed to the peace efforts in the Great Lakes region. By extension, as Comrade Adriano was speaking about the events in northern Mozambique, Tanzania's southeast region of Mtwara is by extension a part of that northern Mozambique dimension. And anyone studying the Islamic State in northern Mozambique is aware that the lingua franca there is Kiswahili, largely because many of those troops are contributed to from Tanzania. In the same vein, in Eastern DRC, a lot of the groups there are in fact benefiting from young people leaving Tanzania and joining those forces. It remains to be seen how that instability in the south of Tanzania and the west of Tanzania is likely to contribute in the security situation in the context of these elections. But I can assure you that it is important to watch what happens in the course of the next week. SADC and the AU have both sent in election observer groups, SADC led by the former Malawian Speaker Richard Msowoya, and the AU led by former President Masisi. Coincidentally, President Masisi was the chair of SADC during the 2020 election, so it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But many of us remain worried also because this is the first time that elections are happening in Tanzania in the absence of any major international election observer groups. The EU is not sending an election observer mission to Tanzania, not even an election expert mission to Tanzania. The Commonwealth has stayed out of observing the Tanzanian elections for lack of invitation. Tanzania has refused to endorse the national assessment mission of the UNDP, so the UN has no footprint in Tanzania's election this time round. And the only observation groups therefore remaining are the AU and the SADC groups that I've alluded to earlier. So I'm very interested also as part of this conversation to hear, what kind of solidarity and support we could get from our Southern Africa colleagues, notwithstanding the historical big brother role of our nation, but also of course, the tense situation we are observing not just in Tanzania, but across the region. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share through this space.
Thanks, Comrade Dosh. I think that that was a very important lesson. That's history for many of us to really begin to connect with what is happening in Tanzania, but put context to it. And I think that you did a splendid job in taking us through the different phases of the challenges that have been developing over time. And I'm quite sure that there are many things that come to the fore that would be important to engage with. But also more importantly, I'm hoping that this will lay a very strong starting point for how we can begin to build solidarity at different levels, but more importantly, people-to-people solidarity. And I know that from this room, there are many colleagues from across the region that have been working in this space in terms of solidarity and would want to work with you and many other colleagues inside Tanzania on how we build bridges and connect the threads to our struggles and how we can honestly and genuinely help bring peace, security, and development to the region. Thank you so much, and we hope that we can continue to see the developments towards the election in the coming week. Hopefully, we will engage with you and get a sense of, even without the presence of a lot of observer missions and independent civil society organizations from across the SADC region, is there a way of us being able to draw information outside Dar es Salaam and across the country? But thank you so much. I want to quickly move to Comrade Takura. Of course, I know that in a minute you could take us through where are we with with Zimbabwe, what's happening in Zimbabwe, just off the cuff, but more importantly, you have had a lot of the inputs from colleagues across the continent, the region, and it doesn't paint a good picture. It's not a positive, promising picture of where we would want to be going, especially given that the last country that got independence in this region has been independent for quite some time. This is 1994, 93, 94. So what do you draw from these deliberations in the case of peace and security in the region and the role of elections? But also, can we begin to a Pan-African agenda of serving our own people? Where are we in building solutions to the challenges that we are facing at a regional level? Do you listen to these inputs and get hope? Or do you listen to these and think that maybe it would take a lot of effort, it would take a lot of years to begin to build the kind of aspirations that the liberation movements laid on the table, but also the citizens from across the continent, Maputo to Antananarivo, are putting on the table as their aspirations and the kind of a region they would want to see? Yeah, your inputs,
Yeah, thank you very much, Comrade Munjodzi, and thanks to all the amazing previous speakers and for the issues that they highlight. To respond to you, Comrade Munjodzi, I think we first need to look at where SADC is coming from. And SADC is not coming from simply a geographical sort of like standpoint. It is more like a political solidarity, liberatory community. And as one previous speaker, I think it was Deus, alluded to, it stems initially from the frontline states. So when we're talking about the region, we have to understand that history. And we have to understand that it is clearly a very necessary and unignorable liberation struggle history based on solidarity across borders, and also based on the fact that countries must become independent, but independence which comes with regional solidarity. But what we have had now, if we look at SADC as a political community, is an abandonment in part of that original historical people-centered solidarity. And we need to return to that, what I would consider a triple balance of regional solidarity. And obviously the first point about that triple balance is that we should quite literally remember our liberation struggle history and how we helped each other in one way or the other become independent, even if some fought wars for liberation, if others had demonstrations and so on. And so we need to recognize that first point in this triple balance. The second point is obviously democracy and peace. We SADC, in its political solidarity, was also in order to establish democracy and peace within all of our member states. And this includes whether it was via elections, peace negotiations, as was the case in Mozambique in the late 80s, as well as with South Africa. But you get a sense that we are not doing that as much as we were. And then the third point, which is perhaps even more important, but cannot function without the first two of this triple balance, is economic development. And this is an important point because most of the problems that we're seeing now, whether they are directly or indirectly related to elections and their disputation, they also come from perceived lack of economic development, which mixes in issues of migration, immigration, xenophobia, and mineral resource exploitation. So having said that, I think the key issue for civil society as well as the general Southern African populations is to understand the contemporary challenges that SADC faces, or we all face, within a very global context. And the first challenge is that whereas SADC was largely socialist at its infancy, and after the end of the Cold War, it became more and more economically liberal because of the World Bank and IMF, and the economic structural adjustment programs. What has since happened in the last 20 or so years, SADC has become quite neoliberal. You can hop from one country to the next and you can see that this is either a very neoliberal political environment, or even if you go to some countries like Angola, it's more like state capitalism, which is still quite literally neoliberal. In other words, it just protects free markets, private investors, private sector, and disinvests in public services, and definitely leads to high levels of unemployment in countries, particularly for young Southern Africans. And this has been made worse in recent months with the ascent of Donald Trump and his new foreign policy and international aid direction, which is very nihilistic and also very nationalistic in terms of centering around American politics and its own internal dynamics. But at the same time, trying to compete with one of the big players in Southern Africa, which is China, as well as a little bit militarily Russia. You have these new dynamics that are affecting how we can respond to our own needs for solidarity. And these dynamics also then affect our internal politics and our internal economics, where we wanted to be more together as a Southern African people. Unfortunately, now we are more and more bifurcated. And we tend to focus more on ourselves and our nationalisms. And in South Africa's case in particular, you have more xenophobia than anywhere else you could imagine in Southern Africa. But South Africa is a direct result of the people migrating from the whole region to work in the mines and so on. It's a very diverse society, but they pretend they're not. But in any event, that reality of neoliberal economics and the changing in global dynamics is a very big challenge that we have to face and confront with a certain amount of historicity, but also a new ideological thrust, a counter-hegemonic ideological thrust. And I'll say this primarily because when we look at these contemporary challenges, we also have to understand that Southern Africa of 1989 is not the same Southern Africa of 2025. What we, people my age at least, thought about SADC when we were younger, we were always singing praises of SADC. What people who are, I think they're now called Gen Zs, think of SADC and Southern Africa is completely different. They have less of a historical value approach to it. It's more about mobility, access to wealth, access to jobs, those are their priorities. They couldn't care less about liberation struggles and how we got to where we are. In fact, some of them recently in some interviews on television don't even know what the frontline states were. So what we're looking at is a changing value system, a changing consciousness about regional solidarity, a changing understanding of what it means to help each other within the region. And in my personal view, we need to return to a regional solidarity that goes beyond elections or electoral cycles, a regional solidarity that looks at what actually is happening in between elections and what's happening in terms of development within countries that share the same geographical space, but more importantly, the historical frontline states and liberation struggle history. We need to look at what's affecting everybody and come up with new approaches. The problem, however, is that even the regional body itself, headquartered in Gaborone, has become corporatized. It has become more like a company, and has also been endorsing what are very clear neoliberal economic development frameworks, which include, of course, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and so on. But what we definitely need to do is to really look at the meaning of solidarity beyond electoral solidarity, because elections come and go, and elections in any event now have a tendency to be disputed. And I'll come to an anecdotal point about that. Kambarege Nyerere, I'm guilty of nostalgia, as someone mentioned, but he did make some major points, for example, around the fact that we must understand that elections or the mechanisms of democracy are not the meaning of democracy. Our elections are a mechanical part of our democracies, but essentially they are disputed because they don't mean democracy as they are intended to do. They are disputed. Even if a ruling party loses an election, it disputes it. An opposition party loses an election, it disputes it. And this has been going on across the region, I think, for the last 10 years. And where an opposition party wins an election, as was the case in Malawi, it doesn't last. Its legacy is limited because the dynamics are beyond the electoral cycle. The dynamics are about the political economy. The dynamics are about what is really happening in between elections and what sort of solidarity actions are we giving each other in between elections. But be that as it may, elections remain important. But we must understand that they have context. And within our region, we must ensure that we contextualize our value systems more, as opposed to the electoral cycle in its occurrence based on time and more. So, because I know everybody is tired and we don't have much time, and I know there are other speakers coming after me, in relation to a way forward for regional solidarity, particularly for civil society in the Southern African region, like I said, firstly, we have to go back to a triple balance approach to solidarity. We have to recognize, number one, history. Number two, we have to recognize the importance of in-between elections having actions that promote democracy and peace, regional actions that don't wait for an election, but that look at what's happening economically, what's happening with mining, with Trump's newfound tariffs, what's happening with Chinese mining and British mining and Russian mining, and what's happening with oil, like in Cabo Delgado, oil and gas, and the politics surrounding that. We need to look at that, and how does that happen? And then we need to look at and reimagine new economic development models outside of the neoliberal paradigms that we are being given by SADC official, the African Union, the World Bank, and IMFs. We need to look at new frameworks. I know that some of you are probably right wing and so on, but as a leftist myself, I would say, like, we need to have a new people-driven economic agenda between ourselves to say, okay, what is a new economically developed SADC looking like? And I think when we do that, we become a bit more organic, and we start looking more and more at issues as they occur on a more regular basis, as opposed to linking them up with an electoral cycle. And to be particular, though, there is also another angle that we need to really understand a bit more. Like I said earlier, a young Southern African of 1990 and a young Southern African of 2025, they have a different approach to their consciousness. And with new media, social media, and so on, they are easily more persuaded by what they want to hear than what is pragmatic. And that's why, in part, when you look at some of these revolutions, as it were, or protests, whether you're looking at Madagascar, even Mozambique as well, and far to the east with Nepal and so on. And if you also look at the Arab revolutions back in the early 2000s, the dilemma is you have these major actions by these young activists, but what then they result in is more conservatism, or in fact, in some cases, military governments as opposed to democratic governments. The initial intention is lost to structured power. And that's mainly because in its spur of the moment political dimensions, protests can seem liberatory and cathartic, but sometimes if we don't think through it, it gets us back to an even worse space. So the issue is to work on, in our regional solidarity, civil society, political parties, take your pick. We need to work on developing a new consciousness about what the struggles really are about. They're not really about an electoral cycle changing presidents. They're about society. They're about ideology. They're about making organic the linkages of our ideas, our actions with a majority of our people. And as dictated to by the liberation struggle history of the region. I will stop there. I won't comment on Zimbabwe because I see there are a lot of Zimbabweans on the chat in the meeting. And if you have any questions on Zimbabwe, I'm pretty sure a lot of other colleagues can comment on Zimbabwe. Thanks, Mjos.
Thanks, Koma. I think always fascinating to listen to your inputs, and I think that quite a clear way forward in terms of where we could be going, what we should be doing. I think raising a new level of consciousness and understanding of the challenges we are facing in a way, in an ideological purview, becomes quite critical. And the danger that you put on the table of an action of the moment that seem very liberatory, ending up taking us back to where we wanted to run away from. I think these are important and critical questions that we should continue to deliberate on, but action on. I think that the issue of solidarity is quite key, and basing that on our history, basing that on the economic development trajectory we are in, and how we can be able to change it so that it doesn't serve the elite, it serves the rest of our people. So in a way, a call to be thoughtful in our processes, in our actions, and in what we do as civil society, but also as a people and leadership of this region. Quite fascinating. I hope that there will be some questions for you. So before we get to that, I just wanted to say that those who have questions on any of the speakers, please put them in the chat, because at the end of the session, we'll try to get as few and to the point questions as we can, but we can capture others, and maybe we'll use other platforms to be able to keep the engagements going. I want to move to our last, but certainly not least speaker, someone who needs no introduction to many of us. She's been a champion for some of the things that we are discussing today for a very long time, both in a personal capacity, but also as a minister, as an activist, as a member of one of the liberation movements of this region, and certainly as a clear understanding of what needs to be done, and quite some lessons on what we can be doing to advance some of the ideals of the different liberations of this region. Comrade Lindiwe Zulu, please, you have had the inputs from colleagues. It's not the entire region, but it gives you a picture of where SADC is, at least in the eyes and the views of those that are on the core face of trying to prosecute the different struggles and the challenges we are facing across the region. But I think that you can help us to connect the dots and maybe begin to move us towards what could be a feasible way forward. What can we be doing in 2025 to ensure that we live the ideals of our liberations, but at the same time, we are able to build as a region sustainable peace, security, and indeed development.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank SALO for the opportunity. And it's always a pleasure for me to be on this SALO platform, and I'm hoping that SALO will continue to bring us together as we are here. I want to start with something that has been bugging me, and I use a Zulu expression. And when I went to Google it, I saw that their explanation of it is not exactly what it is. In Zulu, it is said, "Kwakhala nyonini," meaning which bird is the bird that sang, and probably in this case sang a wrong song or a cursing song. This is what my grandparents used to say to us as we were growing up whenever we didn't do right. Firstly, if you didn't pass in school, or if even in the chores that you needed to do at home, no matter how many times they keep telling you what you need to do, you still don't do it right. So they would use that word, "Kwakhala nyonini." Now, using that for me, I don't know what to call it in English, I'm using it from a point of view that says, what is it that makes us as Africans overall, from corner to corner, to all regions, to all countries, to all of us in the African continent? If my grandmother was still alive, I can guarantee you she would be saying to the leadership of the continent overall. And because now we are speaking about SADC, she would have definitely asked the question to the leaders, "Kwakhala nyonini," meaning, what is it that has happened that no matter how many times we keep repeating one and the same thing, but we still find ourselves, 1 minute you might be thinking we're going right, and then the next we are the direct opposite. I say this also because in preparation for this presentation here, I decided I wasn't going to sit down and make that presentation, but I would rather also just listen to the presenters. But of course, in my mind, I thought it might be a good idea to go back and look at SADC, because we are talking about SADC, and look at what SADC has put in place to ensure peace, security, stability, and development in the entire region. And yet we are finding ourselves, in some places you might think it's a little bit better, but in some places you think it's worse. I mean, Madagascar right now, who would have thought would be where we are today? So I was asking myself the question, what actually is what should we be dealing with first? Should we be dealing with elections? Should we be dealing with peace and stability? Should we be dealing with governance? What comes first before all these things that we are talking about? Because if you look at SADC in relation to peace, security, and stability, as well as governance, clearly it indicates the key pillars and strategies that SADC should have been consistently engaging in order to create the conducive environment for what we're talking about. And there in the key policy pillars and strategies, it talks about conflict prevention, management, resolution, collective security, public security. It also talks about good governance and rule of law. And then it also talks about addressing transitional crime and all that. Now, I'm rewinding my mind to the liberation movements, and having been and still is a member of the African National Congress. What was said by the last speaker actually is very exciting for me, because when I look at all the things that SADC has developed, it goes back to a simple thing of solidarity. But solidarity for what purposes? The history that Zangaza, if I'm pronouncing it properly, speaks to the history of how collectively, we supported each other. Mozambique can talk about that solidarity. Angola can talk about that solidarity. South Africa can talk about that solidarity. And it was more than just solidarity of words. It was practical, it was physical, it had one purpose and one purpose only: let us liberate our people. Now, fast forward, we have done that. The question is, where did we lose it? That solidarity, which should have been expressing itself today in the institutions that we have all developed. And because we are talking about elections and all that, where is the solidarity which should have been developed out of that agenda for the liberation into the agenda of what must be done, utilizing the institutions that we have created in order to respond to the people? I go back again to our last speaker, who speaks about centering everything around the people. The question is, are we doing that? And if we are doing it, how are we doing it? Is it succeeding? Are there strengths and weaknesses within it? What is good in it? Let's keep it and protect it and build it. And what is not good in it? Let us work on it. Because when you can't start with elections, for me. You start with that solidarity. You start with the creation of those institutions. And by the way, in that solidarity, you keep that history. You use that history for development. You don't use that history for making people feel, yeah, but you must just take whatever we give you because we liberated you. You keep that history because that history is what tells the next generation and the next generation where we come from. The last speaker speaks to the Gen Z, for instance, having less of a historical value of what we did. But whose task is it to make them to appreciate that? Because I don't think there's any nation that would never appreciate the journey that it has traveled, even if it's the Gen Z. It's the manner in which we communicate with them, is the manner in which modern communication is the manner in which we respond to their needs of today. And then you use, obviously, that solidarity and say, yes, we went through this process, but today we are dealing with your needs. What are your needs? Your needs are peace, security, stability, a growing economy, prosperity, dealing with unemployment, all the things that make young people very angry today. So I believe the starting point for me is, how do we create a conducive environment so that everything else that is related to democracy, that is related to institutions, that is related to human rights, that is related to issues of women and the empowerment of women and the enabling of women, that is related to young people and young people today feeling like they are valued. You start by the creation of conducive environment. And my feeling is that we have lost a lot in the journey of creating that conducive environment. We have lost in strengthening those institutions that will ensure that human rights are respected, that would make sure that people have institutional recourse across the board, from the time they are born to the time that they die. In the department where I used to be, in the Department of Social Development, they used to talk about from cradle to grave. So we need to create a conducive environment of that entire value chain. And I used to say, let's not start from cradle to grave. Let's start because then you need to create the conducive environment. What do people want? People want the conducive environment so that their livelihoods can be protected. In the protection of livelihoods is everything that you find there, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's even the peace and stability that you are talking about. So I feel we need to take a step back, go back, answer that question. And this platform that we have today has to be a platform that helps us going back to say and then you will describe where have we lost it, what have been the problems. Right from the first inputs that we got today here about Madagascar, taking us through what has happened, I was thinking to myself, hey, we're talking about in the past, Ravalo Manana used to be here in South Africa. Rajuel himself used to be here in South Africa. And I can state a lot of the countries within the SADC who have been in conflict, who we have brought here into South Africa. DRC is what it is today. We've all brought these people into South Africa for sole purpose, nothing but how can we be helpful in bringing peace, security, and stability in our country? And I think unless we go back into saying, what are the things that, what's the end game? Maybe let me just say that. But how do we get to the end game considering all the things that have been said here today? You can talk about Mozambique, for instance. I was in Mozambique just last week. There was a meeting that brought all the ruling parties together. And I was sitting there and thinking to myself, I wish there could be someone else, an outsider, who could come in and say to us, yeah, we hear you people talking, and or we want to tell you that those of us who are in the outside looking in, these are the things that we think you need to focus on. The way forward for me here, having listened to everybody, is to what can we do differently? Do we understand the global challenges that we are facing today? How do we ensure that we are in solidarity with each other? Mozambique and South Africa are going through national dialogues. What is this national dialogue? The speaker from Mozambique said it's not an inclusive dialogue. What is this dialogue? What is the purpose of this dialogue? Should we be having the dialogue simply because we've just come out of the elections and then we didn't get the percentages and everything that we want, and then there's demonstrations, and then there's mobilization of the people? Should we do that only on the basis of the results, or should we keep this as a constant agenda item that is led by the solidarity that we are talking about, so that when we talk about institutions and those institutions that are built in order to protect the people, those institutions are protected. And when one or two of those institutions are beginning to break down, you talk about Cabo Delgado, you ask yourself the question, should we actually not be looking at the international interests and how they are playing us, and how you have Rwanda coming all the way from Rwanda to go there in Cabo Delgado, and then you have SADC, which puts its own together from a military defense point of view, but you don't know whether they did the job or they are now out. And what is it that we need to do? And I want to say the last speaker really, really spoke the language that has been worrying me about all this. And I'm saying the way forward is going to be for us to be in solidarity with each other. But solidarity not for purposes of just solidarity. Solidarity that will unite us, because if we are not united as a region, if we are not united as a continent, we will continuously have people who play us against each other. We'll have superpowers coming in here, doing what they have to do and getting away with it because they call this one to a corner, call that one to a corner, then they call others to go all the way to the United States of America, then they call everyone to go to China. If we are not united ourselves and saying the Africa we want, which is expressed in the AU Agenda 2063, I don't know how much are we implementing that. I don't know how much are we even evaluating whether we are implementing it or not. But I don't even want to go far. I want to remain within SADC because we're talking about SADC. I was in Malawi also for the elections, and listening to the presentation by Thandiso, I was now recalling being in Malawi, and I was saying she is talking about the 2019 election and the 2024, 25 elections. And what we are doing is we are saying nicely, you know, the 2025 elections were better than the 2019 elections. And I wish to thank the Malawi Electoral Commission, because I had the pleasure of meeting with the chairperson, and I had the pleasure of listening to a chairperson talking to us the language that we are supposed to speak in as far as SADC is concerned. It shouldn't be that we are comparing that the elections of 2019 were nullified and this and that, there was violence. It should be that what should the next election look like? Have we, from now till the next elections, are we preparing, firstly, our people to have an appreciation of expectations on them and expectations on the government? Secondly, are we creating a conducive environment for our people? Because in Malawi, as she rightfully says, there was the issue of petrol, there was the issue of the economy. But for me, when I went to see people there voting, I was looking at the state of those people, the elderly who were like on wheelbarrows, the elderly who were walking barefoot, the elderly who looked almost tattered and torn. And I'm like, should we be proud of this? I don't think we should be proud of this, which therefore means everything that we do henceforth, it mustn't be the niceties of institutions that we can show that here's the institution. But when you look at the people who are supposed to benefit from that, you just want to cry. Africa, SADC in particular, cannot afford. We're going to elections of Tanzania right now, and I'm listening. The Mozambican is speaking from somewhere. The Tanzanian is speaking from somewhere. Everybody is speaking from somewhere. Can at some point people be able to speak from their comfort zone of their own countries if need be? And if they have to be somewhere else, there should be someone else by choice, not because they've been forced by circumstances to run away and be speaking for outside. And when SALO begins to put them together, then SALO is looked at, yeah, you SALO, you are busy bringing rebels, you are busy bringing people who cannot, until such time that we are honest, we are frank, we are here for the people that we say we are representing. We are very, very far from making the changes for our people. Our people are not asking for lots of things. They are asking for peace, security, stability, development, prosperity. They want their children to go to school. They want their children to have clinics around them. They want not to walk long distances to school and all. In Malawi, some of the women there that we went to see in the communities, because I'm thinking also, stakeholders cannot be only the people who are organizing. Then when you are monitoring elections, you say, I spoke to all stakeholders, but you leave the people out. You cannot do that. We went in Malawi to go and speak to people in the outside. Many of them, young people in particular, they said to us, we want change, not for the sake of change. We want change that will bring value to us. I'm talking about young people who were sitting in little corners drinking local brew, and my heart was sore because I was thinking, these young people shouldn't be the ones sitting here drinking the local brew. They should be in jobs. They should be creating jobs. The sooner we, all of us, answer the question, I don't think we're going to be able to respond to the needs of our people. And I think the last speaker really rounded up everything for me, in particular, when it speaks to the young people and what the young Southern Africans want today. They look at life very differently today, and rightfully so. Let us not punish them for looking at life in the manner in which they look at it. It's today. And what is today? They just want a good governance. They just want conducive environment. They just want to see themselves going somewhere. They want to be part and parcel of building this region. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Thank you, Com. I think, yeah, quite profound. And when you begin to talk about the state of our people, even as we ask them to go to the polls to vote, I think the picture you painted in Malawi, it brings us to exactly the important question of why do we even go to elections? Why do we do what we do if it does not change the material conditions of our people? And I think that you also touched on very important things that we need to do to be able to go forward. And the idea that why do we keep doing the same things and nothing is changing? But more importantly, what kind of an Africa are we trying to build, and what will it take for us to achieve to that kind of an Africa, in this case, a SADC region? Thank you so much for those critical inputs. And I think that in terms of speakers, this brings us to a closure of the inputs from the speakers. What I want to do is to check if there is one or two people that have a few questions to ask, and that would be good. Do we have any hands? If not, I'll ask one of my colleagues to read some of the questions that I saw in the chat. And just to say that to colleagues, we'll go over time just briefly, and by not a lot of time. But Lily, can we have the questions? I see Prof Mo. Maybe even as Lily is preparing to read, Prof Mo, do you want to put that question in person? I always I'm happy to put you on the spotlight and hopefully hear your voice. I haven't heard it in a long time. Prof Mo, do you want to?
Am I on?
You are audible.
Yeah, I don't quite know how to use the phone, but things come to me eventually. Well, I think I can't see my question, but it's basically asking everybody to think about what in 1986 Ibo Mandaza wrote in his book about the political economy of Zimbabwe. What is the anchor class which arose during these struggles for decolonization, not all of which can be romanticized as the way Takura might want to have them? What's the nature of this class that has emerged and is still in formation today? So what's the nature of its relation to the state, which is the body that we keep thinking about as the one that organizes democracy and good governance, but it also is the seat of accumulation for this new class, which is not necessarily democratic and which is not necessarily representative of the people. So I would just like, people can say very briefly, if they have the time, what do they think this ruling class is like, and how does it relate to the new formations, the new struggles, including liberal democracy, which is becoming more and more authoritarian in the current conjuncture? Okay, is that okay? Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. I think that would be good. Any other person who wants to, colleagues, any burning questions before we cut you off, or before I choose colleagues to say something? Malipo? And
thank you. Am I hearable?
Yeah, quite.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tandiri. Okay, that's beautiful. I just want to emphasize a point here, and I will put a question after the issue that I want to raise. Is the reason why we are seeing the situation around SADC. And among the issues that I want to raise is the issue of the Democratic Republic of Congo, because I'm originally from that country. And from what I'm hearing from politicians around East Africa, and also some politicians here in South Africa, they always emphasize the issue of Banyamulenge, saying that the DRC government does not acknowledge Banyamulenge being part and parcel of the Congolese citizens. I was born in DRC, I was raised in DRC, and we lived with Kinyarwanda speaking Congolese that were born and they were raised and they've been part of our country for years. And there's no time we find ourselves discriminating them based on their language or their nationalities or their origin, let me put it that way. The only time that we start seeing the rise of discriminations of Banyamulenge speaking or Banyarwanda speaking, because when we are talking about Banyamulenge, firstly, Banyamulenge is not an ethnicity. Mulenge is a mountain in the east of DRC, in our province, South Kivu, that is located in the mountains of Mitumba. We call Mitumba Mountains, whereby you'll find Mulenge in the same area. So we have Banyarwanda speaking people who reside, who have been in DRC for years. They've been residing in places like Moba, in Katanga. We have them in South Kivu, which is part of Uvira, Minembwe, and the other part in Haut Plateau. And we have them also in the North Kivu, like Sake and places like Goma. But we never have all this discrimination based on their languages, because until now we have Banyarwanda speaking who are citizens of DRC that are in Kinshasa and the other places around DRC. So what I want to emphasize to say that politicians that have been singing these songs to say they fight in east of DRC or the ongoing war in east of DRC is because DRC does not want to acknowledge Banyarwanda speaking. So from where I stand, we acknowledge each and everyone was born within the boundaries of DRC before the Burundi and the Rwanda and the Congo Belge, it was one country. We acknowledge them to be the Congolese citizen. So the question now that I want to pose to our presenters, is it correct to say that the ongoing war in DRC is because of the discriminations of Banyarwanda speaking people? Because from where I sit, I remember the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, and millions of refugees from Rwanda fled in DRC. Same applies to Burundi. Same year, there was also war in Burundi. Millions of refugees from Burundi fled to DRC. And we saw the same rebels that fled from those countries to come in our country. They caused chaos. They caused chaos. And we are talking about the genocide that happened. DRC, I can call it the genocide that happened in our country, whereby massacres were happening in different places, more especially in the east of DRC, where I come from. Millions of people have died since 1994, since 1996, when the war started in DRC. Now, the issue of addressing the challenge that SADC is facing, but we find ourselves, some countries, they advocate the division in other countries. I don't find myself that we are looking for a solution, but we are looking a way to bring more division in the SADC region. And now the question that I want to pose to our presenters, for instance, our former president here in South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, he always emphasized that the issue of Banyamulenge is something that needs to be addressed. And to us, as a Congolese, the issue is not so-called Banyamulenge. The issue is the minerals of DRC. And that's the key issue that is making our country, for instance, DRC, and the other country like Mozambique, what has been happening in north of Mozambique, and what we are seeing now in Madagascar recently. So what can we do as a SADC region to stop the wars?
Thanks.
That's happening within the region. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Com. I think that the question is quite clear, and just say that we are discussing the region broadly, and the DRC is an important story in the region. And a couple of weeks back, we had a dialogue, or I see Julie is here. We had colleagues from the DRC, and we tried to unpack the DRC situation. These discussions have to continue. One of the things that I think, Com, you are putting on the table is the importance of understanding what is happening in our region. What are the causes of what's happening? What do we need to do to address it? And I think that this platform, as SALO, we are quite committed to continuously using this platform to unpack these things, to find solutions where we are able to bring those that have leverage, that have power to make decisions, to make reforms, to move forward. And I think that you raise an important issue to begin to continue to discuss about what exactly is happening in the region. And I think the speakers will touch on that. Ambassador Mpatho, please, you have the floor. Ambassador.
Yes, good day, Munjozi, and good day to everyone. Thanks to all the presenters who I think it's actually quite important that today's session, has sort of focused more broadly on the region, in the sense that it has enabled us to have a look in on, several countries in the context of issues of peace and security, democracy, and governance. So I think it was a very useful a barometer, for our region. It has enabled us to really have an appreciation of just which way the wind is blowing, or which way things are moving, which direction things are moving in the region. I'll just try to pick up on issues that have been raised by the various speakers, but I'll try to do so briefly. I just want to ask from Desiree, what in her own understanding or perspective she would bring it down to the issue of the circumstance or the set of circumstances that resulted in, President Rajulina fleeing the country. Out of everything that she shared with us, what is it that she would bring that down to? The second point, I think it was a very important thing that came out of Thandizo's presentation, that following the disastrous elections of 2019, which had to be nullified in Malawi, that Malawi actually learned from those elections. And this resulted in some electoral reforms that have kind of given us the elections that we have now witnessed. Because this has been a constant refrain with elections and election observer missions and their reports and their recommendations in various countries, where you find that recommendations that would have been made by an electoral observer missions on issues that they had identified as flaws that needed to be, attended to, they tend to come back to find that they still have to deal with the same flaws that they identified previously. This has been a constant refrain in many elections that take place in our region. So I think it's a very, very good and positive example that Malawi was able to learn from nullification of results and to effect some electoral reform. So I'm just making a note of that. I got, Professor Nvunga, believe me, so many years after leaving Mozambique, I still follow very, very closely, what happens in Cabo Delgado and more generally in the country. And I have to agree with you, that we are facing a situation of a forgotten conflict, but that continues to exact, a very, very heavy price on the people of that region. I have been observing, in spite of what seemed to be the early reports of stability and security returning, I see the tactical maneuvers that have been made by the insurgents, that sought to spread out their presence and actions in a manner that also sought to draw out and spread out the armed forces, but also the growing confidence and growing, aggressive posture that is now beginning to come back into areas such as Mosimbo de Praia, which, they occupied for more than a year until, there was, the deployment of either the Rwandese forces or the forces or the Samim forces. I got a little bit worried when you said that, SADC doesn't care. Because I understood, much more clearly, the environment that was, created and the difficulties that were put in the way of SADC, even before the era of actual deployment, the resistance, that was experienced by SADC, but even when they had deployed, the difficulties that they encountered. But I was a little bit relieved when you acknowledged, that, the government itself did not create the space for Samim to play the role as was intended. And the issue of, the forces there, whether be they Rwandese or Mozambican, only protecting the gas facilities, but not the population. I think it speaks to an issue that Ambassador Lindiwe Zulu talked about in her presentation, which is the issue of centering everything around the people. I also want to make a note of something you mentioned, Professor Nvunga, about a collapse of the state in Cabo Delgado. But I would want to say that I see that as perhaps a micro collapse, which in your later comments, in my own view, we're also beginning to see a macro collapse of the state in Mozambique, precisely because of an issue that you raised of governance never having been right in Mozambique. Now, what I really want to come to, because you made an appeal, on the need for SADC to refocus on the situation in Mozambique. And I want to pick up on an issue on the presentation of Ambassador Lindiwe Zulu, but also the presentation that was made by Takura. You make that appeal, but I ask myself whether there is the space, for SADC to be able to do that. I think that Takura has, brilliantly captured, what the issues are, that, what we have come to as a region. And I want to ask of Ambassador Zulu, if she participated in the meeting of the liberation movements of the region, whether, there is an appreciation of these issues that Takura, so, elaborated so brilliantly in terms of the state of the region. Is there an appreciation of these issues? And is it possible perhaps to share with us, to whatever extent she can, of the, the tenor of the deliberations and discussions that actually took place in the recent meeting of the former liberation movements of SADC. So those are the issues, Chair, that I thought I could just pick up on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ambassador. I think the pleasure I have every time when I see you is that I can always call on you last, because you brilliantly always summarize the issues, and it makes my life easier. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that Lily, can I get a few of the questions in the chat? Then I want to allow the speakers to have a final bite.
Okay, sure. So some were maybe comments, so I'll just read the ones first that are just questions.
Yeah, the questions only, yeah.
To the Tanzanian speaker, Tanzania seemed a very peaceful country before President Magufuli administration. We never heard of abductions or killings. Is it because the country was still a one-party state? Number two, why do you think that President Magufuli had a lot of issues with the neighbors, especially with Kenya? Number three, could you describe the recent case of Mr. John Heche, deputy of Lisue, whereby he was denied entry to Kenya to go attend the funeral of Mr. Raila Odinga? It took the solidarity from people from Kenyans and Tanzanians living on the border to come to his rescue and escorted him through the border. Do you think more countries in the SADC region should show up their solidarity efforts towards our Tanzanian brothers and sisters? And if so, how can we do this? And then another question. To the Malawi presenter, I'd like to understand what are they doing as an organization to make sure that the number of women elected in parliament and other important decision-making bodies increases. I heard her speaking about the Malawi adopting 50-50, but we still have few women being elected through though women constitute the greater percentage of voters. Are there any programs they are doing to engage political parties to adopt 50-50? Do they have a quota system? What are the challenges they're facing? And then to all the presenters, anyone who's willing to answer, what in your honest experience would it take to change Africa into a united continent? To Honorable Lindiwe Zulu, what in your view is your perspective on ZANU-PF's recent proposal of an extension to the presidential term to 2030 and SADC stance on this? Thank you. And then Takura, what kind of reforms do you think SADC needs, especially on the value system you mentioned, the admission and retention of members, for instance? Why doesn't it matter that a country can jail or kill political or civil society activists and journalists and nothing happens to its membership? To the speaker in Mozambique, considering the ongoing instability in Cabo, what innovative or previously unexplored interventions do you believe could be implemented to achieve sustainable peace and long-term stability in the region? And then that's some of the questions from the chat. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And just
my apologies, Munjozi. The one thing I forgot to mention, and this is going to be very brief, is to really thank Dios Roemamu for really giving us a look in on developments in Tanzania, because Tanzania has tended to be off the radar, so to speak, in the context of the discussions that we've had from time to time on issues of peace and security, democracy, human rights, elections, and so on. So I just wanted to make a note, of how good it was that he could be able to share with us in as broad and deep a way as he did on the developments in Tanzania. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I think that Comrade Dos did a marvelous job, because it got us to understand what's happening, but given a clear context of where Tanzania is coming from. I think for many of us who have not worked on Tanzania, it was quite a beautiful lesson in history, but also an understanding of today. And Comrade Dos, even as we come in, I think it would be give us a sense of what should we expect next week as the election happen, but more importantly, beyond next week, from your interactions with many other colleagues in the region and the continent, what can we be doing to try and move? I think it was Comrade Takura who talked about the importance of not focusing on the event of the election itself, but what happens in between. What can we be doing? Prof. Novunga, I also wanted to ask if there is a space for us as a region in the Mozambique dialogue process. And I think, Comrade Takura, we won't let you off the hook that easily. I think a brief comment as you close on what we are hearing coming out of Zimbabwe, the resolution by ZANU-PF around giving President Emerson Mnangagwa a third term. What does that mean? Its impact, and how does it feed into the issues that we have been ventilating for the past 3 hours? But also, Comrade Lindiwe, in terms of the Zimbabwean situation, as we are hearing the preparation to amend the constitution to allow President Emerson Mnangagwa to go to, I think, feeding into Ambassador Mpatlo's question, as liberation movements, are these things that are ventilated at these gatherings, the importance of putting systems that are sustainable, that promote peace and governance, not willingly instigate instability, create conditions for citizens to revolt. Are these things that are discussed among comrades and talk to each other on the importance of really advancing this region in a more progressive way? So I want to start with Stella. And your closing remarks, briefly, you can answer 1 or 2 of the questions, then your closing remarks.
Thank you for giving me the floor. My analysis focuses only on a part of many challenges facing Madagascar, as there are several angles from which the situation can be examined. For instance, some observers suggest that the president's departure may have been facilitated by French intervention, which allegedly organized his exfiltration. However, the real reason behind his sudden flight remains unclear to me, especially considering that just a few days before the crisis, the president still held the majority in the National Assembly, and several elements of the security forces were still loyal to him. So for now, I cannot give a definitive opinion of the real cause of this event. However, I truly hope that from this turning point, we will finally achieve that what we have long been striving for, freedom of expression, justice, and joining democracy in Madagascar.
Thank you so much, Stella. I think quite useful, and I think you bring the issue of understanding the actors at play, the role of France, and I think it's the case with other places. Prof. Novunga.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah.
I cannot open my video.
Okay.
No, I wish to open, but I am unable to do so.
Oh, Lily? Lily?
Oh,
Yeah, it should
says now I
be
can do it.
allowed.
Okay, can you try now? Perfect.
No, thank you very much for this conversation. I mean, indeed, Cabo Delgado, to the ambassador, you are absolutely right, spot on your reflections, and I agree with you that yes, Samim, with its own weaknesses, we have to acknowledge that it was not given the space by our own government. I was one of those who campaigned SADC to deploy. And we campaigned on the grounds that a crisis in Mozambique of that nature, it is not a Mozambique crisis, it's a regional crisis. And if it is allowed to continue, it will spill over into the entire region and will risk the peace and security architecture of the region. To your question as to now, there is a space, there is an opportunity now. There is a new president. He is a young president. He is still a fragile president when it comes to legitimacy. I mean, considering the electoral process through which he emerged as the president, and the killings of Mozambicans, not only the two that I mentioned, but 500 and plus people have been killed. So when you become a president in a process where people needed to die for you to be a president, you are a fragile president. With that considered, he has been saying the right things, calling for dialogue in Cabo Delgado, and also trying to distance himself from the forces that seem to be interested in the continuation of the conflict. They seem to benefit from the conflict. So there is a new opening there. And I think it is time that us as civil society and other forces come together again and re-engage SADC. Not only because there is a new opening in Mozambique, but because Cabo Delgado, it's a crisis that has to be anchored in SADC mechanisms to address it, because it matters for SADC peace and security. So SADC should not wait for that opening from Maputo, but SADC should come in full force so that there is that political will is created. Now, there is a particular caveat here. I'm still writing a piece on it to publish, maybe in the Daily and Maverick, which is what I tend to see as, you know, because former president, he's back there. He's from there, and he's back there. You know, this is not a small geographic thing. No, it is not a small geographic thing. So I'm still working on this to inform the region that this dynamic is taking place. it's not by chance that leaders of political parties, they have to be in the capital city. And former presidents have to be in the capital because it creates a certain dynamic there. With all this said, I think not only there is opening in Maputo, but also SADC should not wait. I mean, it's a bad precedent that we have Rwandese forces there, and SADC is not there. I mean, the African Union here has also a role to play if the African peace and security architecture is to be implemented in ways that it centers solutions and not interests of the people behind some of these dynamics. And I would not emphasize more. And the point presented by Comrade Lindiwe, the need to address the humanitarian crisis. I mean, there is no peace if people are starving. There is no peace if women and children are not protected in a conflict, not only because it is against the law, international humanitarian law, but more importantly, because I mean, it goes against the human dignity of our own people. And solidarity here, Comrade Lindiwe is right in saying that solidarity, it is not be an issue of the capitals, Pretoria calling Maputo, Maputo calling Harare, Harare calling Gaborone. No, 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 it has to be centered in the dignity of our people in the region. We have, as the citizens of SADC, to own SADC and to be the custodians of the solidarity that we talk about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Quite useful, and thank you so much. Apologies for waking you up.
No.
And let me quickly move to Thandi.
Thank you very much, and very, very insightful, discussion. I will dwell much on the Malawi comments, and for us now, I think what's next after the elections, I think now it's high time now we go back to the electoral reforms that were proposed, because after 2019, when the electoral laws were proposed, I think even the civil society, we went quiet, but also I think there was quietness because there was most of the leaders that were in present were not responsive. So it was like going back and forth. But now we have seen that we have not progressed a lot. And a good example is we haven't moved a lot in terms of women representation or even youth representation. Just also to talk about the current situation of the economic crisis that we're experiencing. This is exactly what Dr. Lindiwe said, that when we were going to the polls, Malawi was looking for something different. Not that the situation was good or the leaders that were there were good. We didn't want to recycle, leaders that failed us before, but people didn't have any option. So we went back to the old problem, and we hope that this time around the leaders have learned and they will have a listening, ear, and they will have, policies and programs that will be for pro Malawians or pro poor, and it not enriching themselves, because already we've seen a policy that has been, anyway, it's not yet gazetted, but they're saying we're going to have free education. Yes, it's good, but do we have enough investment for us to roll out free education? We tried that before, and it's already, we don't have, good structures on the ground to, to anchor that. So we'll see how best it will go, but it's a lot of work for us as CSOs as watchdogs to advocate for change, and also advocate for, change of mind, the way our leaders think. Reaching that far, for me, I'm very optimistic that sometimes when you fail and you're given another chance, you come back with a bang and a change. So we are very optimistic with the government, but we'll be there to watch what is happening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tandy. Thank you so much, Comrade Dos. Final word on Tanzania.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to both of you having hosted us, and to Ambassador Power for the kind words. Indeed, I think it's a worrying situation what's going on in Tanzania, and I think certainly because of the historical background that I offered earlier, the nostalgia and the use of Kiswahili in most of our communication, but also a highly repressed media environment. We don't have time to go into the details of that right now, but currently many of the mainstream social media sites are banned in Tanzania. One only has access to them using a VPN, and that has affected our ability to speak out on a situation. There's still effort, and there's still means of accessing information on Tanzania. Over time, we have relied increasingly on Kenya-based media to communicate the goings on in the country. And some of us, in our own small ways, continue to debrief through our mailing lists and other means on the events there. I think in terms of what to expect, increasingly day by day, as I mentioned earlier, given the excessive deployment of the police in the country, I think the chances that there will be violence are growing by the day. So if you ask me what to expect next week, I think certainly there's high chances that young people will come out on the streets. Unfortunately, the state seems thoroughly prepared to unleash wanton violence on them. So that will be very important to watch. Also given the sensitivity around the south and the west of Tanzania that I alluded to earlier. I just want to make one correction based on the questions that were pointed to me. Tanzania formally became a multi-party state in 1992, June 1992, after Parliament adopted the 8th constitutional amendments, amending Section 3 and 10 of our Constitution, which had until then recognized Tanzania as a one-party socialist state. In fact, our first multi-party general elections in 1995 are by far the most progressive elections we've held since the reintroduction of multi-party politics. We were a multi-party state towards independence and up to 1965 prior to that. And they were by far the most progressive because the Electoral Commission was enabled to hire its own staff across the country with the support of the UNDP. Because of how progressive those elections were and the trauma they caused the ruling party, 2 years after those general elections, the then President Benjamin Mkapa introduced in Parliament amendments to the electoral law that provided for civil servants serving at that level, at the district level, to automatically become returning officers in their respective districts. The law was opposed primarily because these civil servants, the district directors, are in fact appointed by the President of the Republic, who occasionally is also, or most often is also a candidate in the elections. For the 3 or 4 elections held after 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, there was a level of tolerance, for these public officials. Why? Because until that point, the public service in Tanzania still enjoyed a level of independence. So even though they were presidential appointees, even when the opposition complained, there was still some semblance of independence that allowed that. Now, President Magufuli comes in 2015 and completely disrupts the civil service. And the appointees to these positions, who until then were career public servants, became what you're seeing in South Africa, deployment from the party. So what President Magufuli did, of the 185 directors that serve across the country, they were all replaced by those who ran for parliamentary nomination in the ruling party. And then they were now deployed. Many of them had no prior civil service experience. And that disrupted how elections are run. And this is why we have seen a heightened contestation of the elections. I should point out also in relation to this that the last time the opposition in Tanzania accepted general election results was 2005, when President Kikwete came in as the most popular CCM candidate with about 81% of the vote tally. Since then, in 2010, 2015, 2020, the opposition has boycotted the election results. So this is why it pricked my interest when Comrade Adriano was talking about the controversy in Mozambique, because we have been on a similar trajectory. Since 2010, our elections have been controversial. And of course, as you can imagine, with every election, the pressure builds up, the frustration builds up. And this is why the opposition felt, all these elections later, there's no point. Like, what was the point of even trying to compete in these elections? So President Magufuli, as I said earlier, was simply responding to the growing popularity of the opposition by violently cracking down on the opposition. But it would be unfair to throw all the blame on President Magufuli. The electoral violence that he significantly escalated, we began to observe it sometime around 2011. In every by-election since then, we've recorded at least one death or some kind of violence commotion. Even in 2015, there were a few such violent incidents reported across the country. And it is just that the escalation that we have seen under President Magufuli, but even more so under President Samia Suluhu Hassan, is worrying. Think about 200 people being disappeared in a space of 2 years, and much more in the last 6 months. And this is what is concerning. In principle, President Magufuli did not have a problem with the neighbors. I wanted to also clarify that. He simply did not like the kind of liberties that Kenyans enjoy and thought it is a bad example for his own population, and tried to do everything in his power to prevent Kenyan businesses from thriving in Tanzania, because he just simply felt that that's not the model I want my country to follow. I don't want my people to be as free and they can question and target and challenge the state. And finally, very quickly on John Heche's case, John Heche was abducted in Dar es Salaam yesterday after managing to escape his abduction at the Tanzanian-Kenyan border as he was attempting to attend Raila Odinga's funeral. He managed somehow to find his way back to Dar es Salaam. And as he appeared in the court case against his principal in the leading opposition party, the treason trial yesterday, he was picked up outside court by the police. But until this moment, the police have not issued a formal statement as to his whereabouts and as to why they have detained him. The people who picked him up outside court yesterday looked like the police. They were heavily armed, and some of them, at least 2 of them, were wearing police uniform. At this point, given the events we have been observing in Tanzania, none of us can confidently confirm that it was the police who took him up. His party colleagues visited the Central Police Station in Dar es Salaam yesterday and this morning. And in both cases, the police have indicated that John Heche is being transferred back to his home district of Tarime, where he had tried to cross the border from. But there has not been a formal statement confirming his custody. So it remains a precarious situation.
Thank you, Com. A very important questions of clarity as well. I mean, clarifying some of the questions that we got. Comrade Takura, can you please come in as we get to round up with Comrade Lindo?
Thanks, Josie. Yes, I think there were 3 questions for me, and then a generic one about the African Union. Prof Moore, I don't agree with Dr. Mandaza's argument around an anchor class in Zimbabwe. Maybe an anchor group coming from the liberation struggle, and also an eventual comprador bourgeois that was feeding off old white capital or previous white capital or private capital and trying to maintain the status quo for at least 8 years. And then with economic structural adjustment, as you well know, Prof, in the late 90s, then emerged a working class movement. So any notions of an anchor class cannot be economic, they can only be political. But the nature of the ruling class in Zimbabwe is liberation war related. It's about war veterans, ex-detainees, and also now private capital. There's now a marriage between our politicians and private capital, and some of it is quite literally front capital, not the real capital. And then on the question of SADC membership, I think it was Tapelo who asked that, and how can one country do something that is wrong? Yeah, you can reform SADC, but you can't reform it without a movement. And perhaps that's something for SALO to think about. How do you build a renewed SADC people's movement that looks at our history, our values, and recalibrates where we are and where we want to go? It's a very difficult exercise because SADC is a very formal and formalized official space and also recognizes sovereignty. But when we're fighting liberation struggles, there was no real big issue about sovereignty except getting independence. Everything else was about solidarity and people-centered solidarity. So we need to review how we look at reforming SADC from a people-centered perspective. It's a big ask. It's almost a long-term project, but it can begin somewhere, somehow now, given what has been happening. And it has to be clearly ideological. And then there was the issue of how do we turn Africa into a united continent? Well, that's a very difficult one, given what's happening in West Africa. It's almost a reflection of Monrovia versus Casablanca group when the Organization of African Unity was being formed. So we need to, first of all, get rid of language barriers, and also relook at migration, both within our continent, but also immigration to the European Union. We need to talk more about that. How do we value the African continent more, or how do we make young Africans believe in their continent more and not have an idealistic and false idealistic assumption that life is better in the global north, so that they stop dying in the Sahel or in the Mediterranean Sea. And in some cases, ridiculous as it may sound, in the Atlantic Sea closer to the Americas. So we need to rework how we interact with young Africans. I know there's Agenda 2063 and it has a youth component, but we have not explored it enough as civil society. We tend to over-formalize it, over-bureaucratize it. Again, we need to have pockets of movements that understand Pan-Africanism in a new light or in a refreshed light and in a relevant light, especially around and over and about social media. And I've noticed, for instance, on some social media platforms such as Instagram, there's a lot of Pan-Africanist content, very historical, and it's also a little bit more about recognizing legends, Bikos, Sankaras, and so on. But what we probably need is less the historical and more the futuristic in order to unite the continent. And finally, Mjozi, to make you happy, on Zimbabwe, in particular on current developments here, and because we don't have time, I'll be brief. Yes, the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front, ZANU-PF party, has mooted an agenda to extend the current president's term of office. This is essentially an internal political matter for ZANU-PF because it is unconstitutional on the face of it, but they will try in the next year to make it a legal position. There will be resistance from the opposition towards that extension of the term of office or what remains of the opposition. And civil society has already indicated via labor and via some human rights organizations that they intend to oppose it in every way they peacefully can. But essentially in Zimbabwe, we do not have an alternative narrative to ZANU-PF's neoliberal economic agenda. In fact, ZANU-PF, it can be argued, is run like a cartel. It's run like a mafia, a marriage between emerging private black capital, whether it's coming from mining, from land, or even from the stock exchange, and current political leaders. And these are also factional. So you've got one faction of politicians and business, private capital, and another faction of business and politicians within ZANU-PF. And it's a very hard ask to say it will change in the short term unless civil society and Zimbabwean opposition political parties get organized. But they should not get organized over the singular issue of the potential term extension of the current president's term of office. They need to get organized around values and principles. And in particular, one weakness that we have seen in Zimbabwean politics, and I think across the region, in opposition politics in particular, is a lack of internal organizational capacity and a deliberate, I guess, inability to understand that even if you're the opposition leader, you're not the opposition leader forever. And neither should you function like an autocrat within opposition movements or even a civil society organization. You have to have also transitional processes. You also have to have an understanding that democracy is not one-sided. It is also an internal process. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you so much, Com. I think quite clear remarks on that, and helping us understand the development in Zimbabwe as we seek to understand the region broadly. Comrade Lindiwe, can you, take us to the end of this process?
Thank you very much. I want to yet again say, SALO, just keep us talking here. Keep bringing in fact, because I've been here with SALO for a very long time, those that have been here all the time will recall that I've always requested that we bring more and more young people to the platform. Some way back when we were still doing the peace process of the DRC and SALO used to have physical workshops, we used to have university students who were doing international relations who used to come and just get an opportunity of sitting and listening, but also asking questions. I'm still requesting that we continue with that, because the youth bulge that we are talking about, and if we don't respond to their issues now, we're going to be consistently in the Madagascar situation or the Nepal situation. In fact, I think in Southern Africa, to some degree, we have been saved a little bit from that, but we cannot rely on being saved when there's something that we can do about it. Now, with regard to DRC, the gentleman who spoke about the DRC, I go back to building institutions and helping people understand the purpose of those institutions, but strengthening those institutions to respond adequately. Those institutions must be seen as a recourse for the people at all times. So when he talks about the issue of tribalism in particular that he's talking about, here in South Africa, we have fought that through before we even got to where we are. Pre-1994, the African National Congress was very clear about the fact that we must deal with tribalism in the best way that we can. Not that we've completely and utterly dealt with it. There's still a lot of education that needs to be done within our communities. There's still a lot of engagement with the chiefs and the kings and all those people who must never be forgotten, by the way, because in the peace processes that we are talking about, those are people we hardly talk to. We just see them as the queens, the kings, the chiefs, and they are on the sideline, and yet they deal with the people on day-to-day basis. So I want to say to Malipo, united in the fight against tribalism must, again, it's yet another solidarity issue, but it's packaged in that form. And what do we do about it? I think with regard to ZANU-PF, the question is being asked, do we talk about these issues? I can guarantee you, in the new environment in which we are all finding ourselves in, and especially because of the challenges that we are now encountering, we are forced to talk about these issues, and we are putting these issues on the agenda. Recently, not long ago, we had the Liberation Movement Summit that took place here. It might be a good idea to look at what came out of it, but one of the things we try to insist is to not to bureaucratize that process of meeting of liberation movements and make governments be the ones that are almost imposing on the liberation movements what agenda must be spoken. One of the things we talk about very strongly, some of us, and me, I believe in it, if you don't put your agenda basing it on the needs of the people, we are bound to come across problems. If you don't strengthen your institutions of governance, if you don't help your own people to hold those institutions and the people who are running the institutions accountable, people will keep on coming back to doing the same thing over and over again. So with regard to the decision that has been taken by ZANU-PF to the president, again, we're going to have to go back into the discussions to say, what does our own constitutions of liberation movements, because we have our own constitutions, what do they say? What is the current environment? What do the Zimbabwe people say? Because at the same time, we can say what we want to say here, but when all is said and done, it will depend on how the people of Zimbabwe respond to this. Our prayer, whichever way it's responded to, should be that we mustn't see violence. We mustn't see people being thrown into prison without giving an opportunity to defend themselves. We need to work towards creating a peaceful environment for holding free and fair elections. We must create an environment where we ourselves are held accountable for decisions that we make, but also for the constitutions that we have. How do we even protect the constitutions ourselves? Never mind, I'm not talking about the constitution of the country. I'm talking about our own constitutions as liberation movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Always good having you, and quite important nuggets of wisdom from your inputs. And colleagues, I know that we have gone over by an hour, and we still have around 48 people in the meeting. That says that there is a lot of thinking, discussion, consensus building that we need to do at this level. And we know that today's dialogue, I mean, listening to Stella, listening to Thandi, listening to Comrade Valentine, listening to Prof. Novunga, Takura, Ambassador Linde, it's quite clear that we have a region that is on the edge, and we need to really work out quite very fast how do we go back to the basics to make elections important again, to ensure that institutions are not buckling. I think when we hear of what Comrade Lindiwe was putting on the table around barefooted elders who were walking to ballot to vote in Malawi, and questions around what do elections mean? What is their purpose? What are we trying to achieve? The Comrade Malipo from the DRC talked about the Eastern DRC situation. And when I think Comrade Takura and Comrade Lindiwe talked about solidarity, once our liberation sort of backbone itself and has frayed into one, unfortunately, can only explain as a neoliberal script. And turned into superpower games as we see China's efforts in the region, as we see Trump's trade deals, and many other things that I think have been put on the table. The question is, what can we do to make SADC, both the institution but its citizen, really embark on meaningful strategies to build peace, guarantee security, entrench in a more positive way and progressive way democratic practices? What can we be doing to ensure that we return to people-driven action around addressing many of these challenges that have been put on the table? And I want to thank you for bringing these issues to the fore and for the robust discussion from the questions, from the inputs, and my colleague Lily will give closing remarks. But from me, thank you so much for taking us through the last 3 hours, quite rich, and guaranteed that these inputs for us don't end here. They inform the next steps of our work and our programming, and in some way how we engage with those that have power to try and move the needle towards a positive future for the region. Lily, thank you.
Thank you. I think mostly you've said it all, but just on behalf of the Southern African Liaison Office, just to extend our grateful thanks to everybody who's attended today, to everybody who's participated, and of course those who've stayed for the extra hour of a 3.5-hour dialogue. So thank you so much for being part of this incredibly important and engaging discussion. Thank you so much to our developmental partners, the Norwegian People's Aid, who enabled us to make this dialogue possible. And thank you to my colleague Munjodzi for your excellent facilitation. And thank you also to our remarkable panel of speakers, but Munjodzi has already touched on that, so I won't go into detail. And thank you individually, but it was really a fantastic conversation. Thank you, and we're looking forward to continuing with further dialogues of this nature. So from SALO, good afternoon and goodbye, and thank you so much. Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.